If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos like this.
To those of you who have truly encountered humanoids, greys, aliens, UFOs, or experienced abductions, what is your most terrifying story?
On May 9, 1985, around 4:30 a.m. near Hadock, England, a witness had pulled over the side of the road on his motorcycle in order to smoke a cigarette and drink some tea when he suddenly became aware of a humming sound coming from an adjacent field. The witness walked over to the field to investigate. He saw a silvery glow emanating from a dip in the ground nearby. Two figures suddenly approached, and as he attempted to leave, a voice said, "Do not be afraid." The figures were now a few feet away. They were both described as human-like, of similar appearance, one a male and the other a female. The female was 5 feet tall, and the male was somewhat shorter. Both had straight, shoulder-length blonde hair parted in the middle and were dressed in blue ski-type suits. Each had an egg-shaped implement attached to a belt around their waists. The woman did all the talking and explained to the witness that they were from the third solar system. Later, both figures walked back to the silvery glow in the field. Moments later, the humming sound became more intense and the glow brightened. Then an object the size of two large-sized buses shaped like an elongated rugby ball lifted from the hollow. It hovered for a few seconds, then silently shot away at incredible speed. A basketball-sized orb of light is floating around. Has anyone heard of anything like this? This was about 10 years ago. My family, 2 other families, and a pair of grandparents all saw something strange floating in the air. Probably 13 or so people saw this. I was probably 13. We were in rural PA. We were gathered around a fire pit late at night. It was pitch black in the woods surrounding the camp, which was a big open grassy area with a cabin in the middle. Don't remember who saw it first. But there was this ball of light, probably between the size of a cantaloupe and a basketball, just floating around in the tree line across the clearing. It was hard to tell in the pitch black forest, but it looked about treetop height. It moved slowly, looking like it was just floating along, doing something like loops as it went. The motion was fluid and nonlinear. It was white and bright. The light was constant, not flickering. It kind of just drifted along from right to left. I don't remember how it departed. The whole thing lasted probably a minute. It went from curious to puzzling to straight up ominous as we all realized it wasn't something within our understanding. We were all freaked out. We all ran inside. I hid within while some of the men went outside with guns. It was gone, apparently. We all saw it. It wasn't a drone or a person holding a light/headlight. I really have no idea what it could even possibly be. Ball lightning is a possibility. But it was a clear night, and it was a constant, unwavering sphere of light. I'm well researched on UFOs, I haven't heard of any like this one. Has anyone heard of or had similar accounts? 1997, Colorado Springs, Colorado. I was 8 years old, playing in the sand volleyball court at the park down the street from my house. I was engrossed in my activity, burying my collection of Happy Meal toys in the sand and then digging them back out, repeat. I was looking down but decided suddenly that I needed to look up because the world around me had lost all sound. There was no longer any ambient noise. There was no more traffic noise from the busy streets just a block away. There are no more dogs barking. No more birds are chirping. I looked at the street that bordered the park, and that is when I saw it. It looked like a stealth bomber turned sideways, nose leading, one wing down toward the road and the other pointed up at the sky. It was completely shiny black in color, stood as tall as a house, and had an arrowhead-shaped wing. It was cruising the street at 3 miles per hour. It was effortlessly gliding over the road, and I watched it for perhaps 20 seconds. As soon as it had passed behind some 2-story houses and out of my sight, I got my hearing back in full force. I ran home with my piss-soaked pants and never spoke a word of it to anybody. I've had 2 paranormal experiences. First was going to an abandoned house at night in a very rural area. We were teens doing stupid teen stuff. On the walk there, I swore I saw a thin, pale, bald man hiding behind a junk appliance, oven or washer, in the woods. When we got to the house, there was a presence walking around us. You could feel the floorboards give way and hear the creaking of the footsteps in the room with us. This was 20 years ago, and recently I realized that man in the woods was possibly a crawler. Second, I was touring a Mayan archaeological site near Cancun. I climbed the main pyramid. It was very hot, and there was a little room at the top of the temple. I went inside for shade and found a cold draft of air in the corner. As my eyes adjusted to the light, I saw that the cold air was coming from a hole in the stone wall. There seemed to be a single missing stone. I looked in the hole and saw a traditional Mayan man in a loincloth and war paint walking in what appeared to be the room next door. After a few moments, he noticed me and started to dance and beckon me to come to him. I couldn't believe my eyes and was about to ask another person on the tour with me to look in the hole to prove what I was seeing was real. The moment I decided to say something to the person standing next to me, the scene disappeared. It was just a hole with a little beam of sunlight and no more cold air. I exited the room I was in and went outside to see if there was another room where the Mayan man could be. But there was nothing. It was fenced off and a straight drop down off the back of the pyramid. Anyway, I believe that there are other dimensions and entities that inhabit them. That's the most plausible explanation to me when considering where aliens come from. I've waited my whole life for something extraordinary, and it happened. I was in Cedar Springs, Michigan, about 2 weeks ago. As I was driving down a country road a mile from my house, straight ahead was a giant field with only a few houses that could see it. Suddenly, I caught sight of what appeared to be a drone hovering above the vast field. I assumed the car, parked off the road nearby, belonged to the person piloting that drone. As I approached a stop sign at an intersection where a dirt road branched off, the parked car pulled away. Curiosity piqued, I pulled over to the shoulder of the dirt road to get a better look. I had heard about the drone sightings in New York and New Jersey, and I've followed those stories for a while. Being obsessed with space, I hoped that maybe this drone was something special. But as I scrutinized it, it appeared to be just an ordinary drone. I turned off my car, and the sound of the drone's propellers filled the air. It hovered silently for a moment before maintaining a consistent height and gliding away in a certain direction. In an attempt to attract its attention, I began to flash my headlights, alternating between high and low beams, silently pleading for it to return. I want to see more of you. As the drone momentarily vanished behind passing clouds, I decided to call my friend Rose on my laptop. I didn't have a cell phone, just my laptop connected to a jetpack Wi-Fi. Just as I began to explain what I was seeing, I noticed a light reappearing in the sky. This time, it was a white light, and it was coming back toward me. I exclaimed to Rose, "It's coming! It's coming!" To my astonishment, I saw not one but two white lights in the sky. I thought, "Rose, there are two of them." It felt as though they were looking right at me. As I glanced down, I noticed that Rose wasn't responding, and suddenly my laptop, originally at 40% battery, shut off without warning. A wave of fear washed over me as I turned around, scanning for any other lights or vehicles in the area. The two lights seemed to maintain their focus on me. No longer could I hear the sound of propellers, it was eerily silent. I continued to watch as they drew closer, almost as if they were observing me. Then, one of the lights illuminated the woods briefly, resembling a camera flash or an X-ray scan, lighting up the trees for a moment before fading back into darkness. I pondered why they had done that. Perhaps it was just a passing car's headlights, I thought, but deep down, I felt something more significant was happening. As the two lights began to move away, I noticed they gradually got closer together, merging into one. They pulsated rhythmically, splitting apart and coming back together, almost like they were connected by an unseen force. It was a mesmerizing sight, and I couldn't tear my eyes away as they flew at a consistent height, maintaining their elevation as they moved in the same direction they had initially come from. I felt compelled to follow them, so I pulled away, keeping them in my line of sight. They flew quickly, gaining distance on me, but I continued to watch as they soared into the early night sky. The last thing I saw was the pulsating light disappearing into the horizon, leaving me in stunned silence. It was the first time my jaw had dropped in disbelief, realizing that what I had witnessed was something extraordinary, something that had started as an ordinary drone but transformed into an inexplicable experience. When I'm telling you it was all just weird. It was a drone, and then it wasn't. This happened in Cedar Springs, Michigan. The corner of Becker and Myers Lake. Time, 8:30 p.m.-ish. Location, Cedar Springs, Michigan. I encountered an unknown intelligent creature. Fernandina Beach, Florida, 2006 10:15. I encountered an unknown intelligent creature. I pulled into my driveway in Fernandina Beach, Florida, around 9 p.m. in the evening of Sept 2006. It was very dark out with no cars or streetlights nearby. When I stopped my car and turned it off, I then opened my door and stood up to exit the vehicle. As I stood up, I saw something that is difficult to describe. With the car door still open, I saw what looked like some kind of cloaked creature walking around the corner of the house from the backyard. It was hard to see. It looked like the shadow of a human-sized creature. It was totally black and moved like a person walking upright. It blocked out what was behind it, and I could really only see the distortion it caused. Energy surrounded the distortion, giving it wavy edges. I could make out its head and shoulders, but only in vague form. The creature took several steps, and at the instant that I thought to myself, "What is that?" It stopped dead in its tracks and appeared to look right at me. At this time I was scared to death that this creature had noticed me and was looking right at me. After a few seconds of looking at each other, the creature turned and walked back around behind the house, and I never saw it again. The entire encounter lasted about 20 seconds. When I saw this, I thought for many years it was a ghost or demon, as my grandmother often told stories of seeing ghosts. Only recently have I begun to think it was an intelligent creature with a technology that was inexplicable. After the encounter, I got back into my car and drove to my roommate's work and waited for him to get off work and come home with me. This was the most terrifying experience I've ever had. This is the second unfamiliar encounter I've had. I reported on MUFON a UFO sighting I had around 1996. For years I believed that encounters like these were just crazy people. I have been forced over the years to believe that we are clearly alone and not the smartest or most technologically advanced creatures on this planet and beyond. I was traveling back home with my mom from my aunt's house on a warm, sunny afternoon. While I was sitting in the passenger seat, an object just appeared in the sky a little to our left. We both saw it immediately. The size of it is what was shocking more than anything. It had the classic saucer shape and was shining brightly because the sun was reflecting off of it. We continued driving down the road a few seconds, just admiring this craft when all of a sudden we saw something I still don't believe to this day. It just vanishes. Disintegrates. Disappears. Call it what you will. I looked back at my mom, and I could tell by her expression she had seen the same thing. Since this sighting, I have always been interested in UFOs and the possibility of other life in our universe. This object in the sky was definitely not a helicopter, airplane, or flock of geese. My mom and I still talk about the sighting we had and can't come up with a reasonable explanation as to what we saw that day. This is my UFO story, and it is not a hoax or fabrication. Everyone always laughs at me when I tell this story, but that's fine. I know what I saw. Edray, West Virginia. One night a few years back, my friend, who was driving, and I were taking his girlfriend home when he decided to take the long way home. As we are driving along this fairly deserted back road, I begin to zone out, and I stare at this blinking red light off in the distance and casually think to myself, I wonder when they built a cell phone tower all the way out here. When suddenly it blinks and is dramatically closer than it was just a moment earlier. At this point my friend points it out and stops in the road. It blinks once more and is directly in front and over top of us. The red light is so bright it floods the car in a deep scarlet hue. I lean forward so that I can see directly into the light. In that brief moment, I feel a flood of negative emotions. The closest description I can offer is that of being naked under a giant microscope and having every pore examined thoroughly. I then look away from the light to my friend and ask him to drive. He barely responds, apparently in a similar state. Then he snaps out of it and starts driving. As we get a little ways down the road, I notice the red light isn't fading, and the interior of the car is still clearly lit by it. I look out the window, and to my horror, the light is following us and does so for approximately 1 to 2 miles. The light unexpectedly veers off to the left and comes down to ground level in a patch of trees adjacent to the road. My friend stops the car again and continues to stare at it and abruptly declares he is going to get out and look at it like he is in some sort of trance. He opens the door, and I grab his arm and tell him if he does, I will get in the driver's seat and leave him, that we had to leave that instant. He looks at me, seems to come to his senses, and punches the gas so hard that the tires lose traction and spin. The light remained stationary as we rode away, but I've never looked at the night sky the same. Unknown humanoids, 10 close encounters of the third kind. A close encounter of the third kind, meetings with humanoids. This happens more often than most people think. There are thousands upon thousands of cases on record, coming from all over the world. This presents 10 cases of extraterrestrial humanoid encounters you probably haven't heard before. Short and tall humanoids, human-looking ETs, robotic beings, greys, and more. Each case reveals remarkable insights into the nature of UFO contact, what they are doing, and why they are here. 1 Plant-picking ETS. One morning in July 1954, Harold Carpenter woke up to hear a buzzing noise coming from the woods near his home in Temple Ewell, England. When it happened several times, he went to investigate and came upon a landed UFO and 5 short humanoids. They were using tweezer-like instruments to place twigs and leaves in small jars. Seeing Harold, they fled into their craft and flew off. 1 Something abnormal. Driving near Girona, Spain, one night in October 1958, José Luis Angelo observed a UFO descend into the forest. Suspecting a plane crash, he pulled over and ventured into the forest. Instead, he came upon a UFO hovering above the ground. Next to it were 2 short, large-headed humanoids wearing jumpsuits. He watched for 15 minutes until they returned to their craft and departed. 3. I want to go for a ride. As 13-year-old Maria Ivanovna returned to her home in Vitebsk, Belarus, one day in July of 1963, she saw two metallic discs overhead. Suddenly her 4-year-old brother ran towards them, and one of the discs swooped down apparently to pick him up. Maria's sister grabbed him and pulled him away just in time. But they were all close enough to see a 4-foot-tall humanoid sitting inside a transparent dome on top of the craft. 4. The Winstead Encounters. On the night of September 15, 1967, two teenage girls looked out the window and saw a glowing UFO crisscrossing the fields behind one of their homes in Winstead, Connecticut. Moments later, they heard a noise in the barn and saw two short humanoids with big heads run across their yard. Soon a third one appeared. This was just the first of a wave of encounters that put Winstead on the UFO map. 5. Blue Ridge Humanoid. On the night of March 1, 1974, Billy Wayne Plasters saw an odd glow on the hill near his farm in Vesta, Virginia. Alerting his family, they all observed a strange craft ascend and dart away. When the strange glow remained, Billy and his brother-in-law drove to the area and came upon a landed craft and a tall, well-built humanoid. They tried to talk to it, but when it moved towards them, they panicked and fled. Later, they found a huge burned spot. 6. The Shiny Silver Sewickley Humanoid. In January of 1974, numerous people across central Pennsylvania reported UFOs. Many reported that they were chased down the highway by strange craft, but events came to a climax on the night of March 24 when a young man was motorcycling in a rural area of Sewickley and caught a tall, silver-clad humanoid figure by surprise. The figure crouched and then darted away, leaving behind strange footprints. 7. The Sweet-Smelling Alien. Hearing footsteps outside his home in Viterbo, Italy, on the night of June 25, 1974, Mr. DP went outside and saw his cat was bristling with fear. He also smelled a strange sweet odor. Sensing a presence, he was then shocked by the appearance of a glowing humanoid in a shiny, skin-tight jumpsuit. The strange being quickly floated up into the sky and was gone. Mr. DP was stunned, and after his encounter, he had a headache that persisted for a full week. 8. The ET with the Flashing Eyes. At 9 p.m. one evening in July 1975, Carmen B. stepped outside of her home in Saint-Dizier, France, to hang her laundry. Without warning, the yard was flooded with light. Turning around, she saw a short humanoid staring at her. It had a huge head and large flashing eyes that left her hypnotized and paralyzed with fear. She almost fainted from shock but managed to break free and flee into the house. 9. The ETS in the Forest. On the afternoon of February 14, 1984, a group of young children playing in the Tukola forest near their homes in Linowek, Poland, saw a small craft descend downward. At least two metallic-looking short humanoids frightened the children, who fled to their homes. Investigators had the children draw what they saw. Later, landing traces were found. 10. An Interrupted Journey. At 4:30 p.m. on August 25, 1999, mechanic Carlos Colin's truck mysteriously stalled along National Route 5 near Trenc-Lauquin, Argentina. 5 tall figures in a glowing dome appeared in front of him. Suddenly, the beings turned away, and they disappeared. Carlos found himself standing in a field some distance away. After the encounter, numerous psychic and paranormal events occurred. 10 more cases showing once more that we are not alone in the universe. It's time for the world to face this fact. UFOs are real. Extraterrestrials are here. I had this experience about 30 years ago. Middle of the night, in my bedroom, on my back in bed with my spouse. Some physical presence of beings in the room at the foot of the bed and at my side. Blurry, groggy, almost like I was sedated, I couldn't make out details. I was elevated bodily, on my back, above and out over the foot of the bed. It felt like I was on a stretcher or a board. I could feel my own weight against my back. It was hard to explain, but not weightless. I somehow went out the bedroom door and through several walls in the front wall of the house, foot first. Only one other snatch of memory was then on my back on what felt like an exam table, some covering like translucent cloth over my eyes, intensely bright white light shining through. I couldn't move or see anything, like I was sedated, but didn't really want to move or struggle anyway. No panic, no fear. Some work is being done low down on my throat, in that notch between your collarbones. More than just an exam or feel. It was taking time to do, there was some attention being paid to that spot. Nowhere else do I recall. I could feel the touch of what felt like 1 or 2 fingertips at a time. No poke, no pain, no marks. I woke up at about 3 a.m., sitting up on the side of the bed. Felt extremely exhausted and like there was a loss of time, although I don't really know exactly when it started. No other memories of it, and as far as I know, it has never happened before or since. But it wasn't a dream. I don't have sleep apnea, bad dreams, sleep paralysis, or mental or emotional issues. I don't use drugs or alcohol. No PTSD from it. Never put under hypnosis. But some time after that, I developed a slow-growing lump at the base of my neck, on the backside, outside over the center of the C7 vertebrae. Almost directly behind where that work was being done. It grew to the size of a golf ball, tried to have it surgically removed, local anesthesia didn't work on it, and it was stuck on, the doctor could only get part of it removed, and it grew back to the same size, no larger. It was lab diagnosed as a lipoma, at least the piece he got out was. I have the scar and the regrowth to prove that part. As an aside, I also have distinct childhood memories of 2 events where an individual peeked in on me and then disappeared into thin air when they went around a corner or obstacle. They had female Asian facial features and were dressed in black. I remember it felt as though they were checking in on my well-being. I told my elderly grandmother, a native of rural Poland from another era, born in 1889, and she called them witches and spoke as though she knew of their existence. Anyway, I studied and have worked for decades in a hard science field, and I find myself scoffing at a lot of other things I hear, so this is difficult for me to explain to myself. Of those people I have told this to, most roll their eyes. At the age of 6, I encountered an alien or some other strange live being. I am currently 18 years old. I don't think I will ever truly be able to get this image out of my mind, for I don't think I've ever been as scared as I was in that moment. I used to live on a large piece of farmland in South Texas in a house that was built in the early 1900s. It was a beautiful house that my great-grandfather built, and I was lucky to say that out of the many cousins that I have, I was able to live in it as a child. There was just always something off about it that left me feeling uneasy to this day. I wasn't the only one that was always on my toes about the house, my older siblings were too. Every single night my brother and I would sleep with my father. My brother was also in 7th grade at the time. Yes, we had our own rooms, but sleeping in our own beds just wasn't a thing, due to one reason. After about 3 hours of sleeping between my father and older brother under the covers one night, I always sleep under the covers for no apparent reason, I woke up with an uneasy feeling and felt a little hot. I then eventually took the covers off my face to see a large figure standing over my brother on the right side of our king bed. I felt my heart drop. Everything on this figure was so distinct due to the moonlight gleaming through the window and the night light in the corner. Its eyes were large and black, and they even held some sort of shine due to the reflection of the moonlight. It was so tall and looked curious as it was standing over my brother, looking at all 3 of us. I know I sound crazy right now, but trust me when I say I can still remember it to this day. I'm no alien/ghost obsessed person who claims that every strange sound that they hear is a ghost. I don't even know if I believe in ghosts or aliens. But what I saw will never leave my mind. It didn't look right, and no hallucination could have possibly been so vivid to where it still crosses my mind 12 years later. I eventually woke my dad up by tapping on his shoulder under the covers while squeezing my eyes shut, trying not to scream, considering I didn't want this strange creature to see me make any sudden movements. He finally got up and turned on the lights, and I at last opened my eyes back up. It was gone. I've never seen my father so terrified. My cousin, friend, and I decided we wanted to go camping out in my woods, about 4 to 5 acres, for the night. We just sat around in the tent playing Stratego for most of the night. When it got late, approximately 2 a.m., my cousin had already fallen asleep. My buddy and I had decided it was probably a good idea to grab some Z's as well. We were both lying in the tent, and we then heard an odd sound. The best way I can describe it is that traditional UFO, like woo woo woo, sound you get from movies. At this time we started seeing lights above the tent. These lights didn't seem to resemble anything I've ever seen before. They were very bright with a multitude of colors like orange, yellow, and blue. It seemed as if it was hovering directly over our tent. There was no wind or anything. I and my buddy wanted to check out what was going on, but we couldn't move. I felt like I was paralyzed from the neck down. I could turn my head and talk to him, but I couldn't get up, and neither could he. It was by far the weirdest and scariest moment I've ever felt in my life. I have never had any sleep paralysis problems or anything similar. The occurrence only lasted for about a minute or so until it just stopped suddenly. There were no more lights, no sounds, nothing at all. After it left, we could both move again. We got up and rushed outside of the tent, and everything was as it had always been. Nothing out of the ordinary. We couldn't sleep the rest of the night and woke my cousin up to tell him about the incident he somehow managed to sleep through. His response was that it was probably a helicopter or something. The rest of the night felt odd in a way that's hard to describe. It felt like everything was in fast forward. I wish more than anything that I could have looked outside of the tent to know what actually happened. It is entirely possible that this wasn't a UFO or what have you, but I can't rule that out either. What are those things? Location: near Monahans, Texas. Date: December 11, 2009. Time: night. The main witnesses were having a family/friends get-together to celebrate a birthday. During the celebration, two of the witnesses' nephews and a niece rushed into the house, screaming loudly, claiming that a plane had crashed in one of the nearby pastures. The witness, his brother, and three others walked outside to see what was causing the ruckus. They didn't see anything out of the ordinary except for a strange burning smell that smelled like burning mesquite. They didn't think anything of it since it was kind of nippy and someone could have been burning some wood in their fireplaces. They asked the children to show them where they saw the plane go down, and they walked over to the place they pointed to. The first thing they noticed was that all the dogs in the area were going crazy. The dogs were frantically barking, as if they were all witnessing the same event. The area is a pretty much rural community, and many of the houses are set on large plots of land, usually 4 to 5 acres per house. Although they could see the houses of many of their neighbors and they do have traffic on the road, you do get a feeling of being all to yourself out here. Some of the houses are overrun by wild mesquite trees, only a small portion of the land surrounding their house is cultivated and cleared out. Beyond the stand of trees runs a small barbed wire fence that separates them from their neighbors, who they could see were home from the lights in the house. They walked around the edges of the trees, not wanting to really go into the stand at night. Even though it was technically winter, there could be rattlesnakes seeking shelter in amongst the trees, not to mention that mesquite trees have some wicked thorns that protrude from them, which are razor sharp and quite capable of punching through a pair of jeans or boots. As they looked around, they started noticing some sort of electrical charge in the very air around them. Almost like the kind you feel when you approach a large electrical substation or a charged and active radio antenna. As they made their way around the trees, one of his brothers noticed some light peeking through the brush. He told him it was probably one of the neighbors leaving or coming home. He promptly told him that it couldn't be headlights because the light seemed too diffused and not as concentrated as a car's headlight. They moved around as they cleared the stand of trees and were shocked to see an oval-shaped object hovering maybe 4 to 5 feet off the ground. They stood there, full of shock and awe. As they stood there watching the object hover without any sound, the witness noticed that it was perhaps about 30 to 40 feet from front to back. It was maybe the same dimensions all around. The object seemed to be of a highly polished material that reflected the area around it. The reflection of the distant streetlight from the surrounding neighbors' properties seemed to reflect off the surface of the object. There was also a small, dull glow to the object, barely noticeable unless you were really looking. It was almost like an aura of sorts, an iridescent blue of sorts. As they stood in total shock, his brother next to him expressing disbelief, they saw two strange-looking men appear from around the object. They at first didn't notice the witnesses. They were busy running around and gathering objects from the ground and from the trees. They looked around 4 feet tall, like his oldest nephew, but thin, like they had no meat on their bones. Their heads were large, and their arms were long and thin and hung down around their knees. About this time the witnesses' 2 nephews came walking behind them, startling the witnesses. They saw the object and the strange man and in a voice that only a kid can project, screamed out loud, "What are those things?" That's when the creatures turned and noticed them. The sight of the creatures was something that will haunt the witness until the day he dies. They turned and looked right at them. Their eyes were large, almost like the eyes of a praying mantis, except they were jet black and wrapped around their heads. The 2 creatures looked at them for about 7 seconds, without the slightest movement, and then they calmly walked around the craft, one right after the other. They disappeared behind the craft, and they never saw them again. A few seconds later, the craft silently lifted up, with no rush of wind, not even a swaying of the nearby branches of a mesquite tree. Silently rising, it hovered approximately 40 feet above the ground before launching with a force akin to that of a ferocious storm. As it zoomed away, it started glowing and made it easier to track as it zoomed away, getting higher and higher until it faded away. The witnesses stood silently until one suggested calling the police, but they pulled the idea. Some of the witnesses refused to talk about the incident later. I saw an alien in my parents' room when I was 11-ish. I have always had trouble sleeping. As a child, when I couldn't sleep, I'd go to my parents' room and sleep on their floor. I would just walk in their room and make a pallet on the ground. I'd do my best to not wake them up. This particular night when I walked into their room, they weren't alone. There was a stereotypical gray alien standing by their bedside. The second I walked in, it snapped its head to look at me. It has huge, black eyes. I immediately darted around the corner and turned the light on. The light switches for their room were in the hallway leading up to them. Turning the light on woke my parents up, and once I heard them talk, I looked in, it was gone. Almost 15 years later, and I can remember this vividly. I know for a fact I didn't dream it. Never really told anyone this because I know how crazy it is. Figured I may as well post to this community to see if anyone has experienced anything similar. Thanks for taking the time to listen to all this. My alien encounter experience. I have always held the belief that there is more to this life than meets the eye. UFOs, cryptids, paranormal, Atlantis, etc. I always believe that, although not entirely true, these stories, myths, and legends came from some truth. I am grateful for this platform where I can share my stories without fear of judgment. Anyway, here's my story. I recently moved out of my parents' house. I lived there with my mom, dad, sister, fiancé, and our 3 dogs. I moved out because, well, it was time I moved out. I don't know if this is important to mention, but I am mentioning it anyways. One night, about a week and a half before I moved out, I had a dream, or at least I think it was a dream, that 3 alien beings were in my room. 2 of the beings were over me and 1 over my fiancé. The beings were not gray but a greenish gray. The thing is, I did not feel scared, threatened, or terrified, but the complete opposite of that, I felt calm. They spoke to me telepathically. They said, "Please, don't be afraid. We are here to help you. To show you the true path. To help you help others." At that point, the speaker reached out his hand. I say is because it was a male voice that was speaking. Anyway, he reached out his hand to help me up. This gesture stood out to me because they weren't forcing me to go with them but asking me if I wanted to take the offer. I reached back and began to help me up. As I was getting up, my fiancée woke. She reached for me because she was scared. The being next to her reached for her hand, and when he touched her, that's when she awakened. She started freaking. At that point, the being let go and tried to calm her. Saying to both, "Please calm down, we aren't here to harm you. Please, we must go." And reached for her hand again. I assumed the being assumed that since I was willing to go, that she was going too. Because she was freaking out, I started freaking out. I told them to leave her alone, to let her stay if she didn't want to go. They just kept trying to calm us down again without forcing us to go with them. I sat up on my bed, and as soon as I did, they were gone. The following 2 days, I woke up drenched in sweat. I don't know if it has any relevance to the story, but I mentioned it just in case it does. I have not experienced it since. It might sound weird, but I kind of wish I did someday. I felt at peace with them. So that's my story. Please give me your thoughts. Thanks. Did I see an alien? I have a story that I want to share to see if someone has experienced something similar or to find some explanations. I was maybe 7 or 8 years/old, now I'm 22, I was in my bedroom getting ready to sleep. My mother was in the other room, waiting for my dad to come back from work. The door of my bedroom was closed. It was summer, I guess, because I remember having the windows open. The room was dark with no light, except for the moonlight and the light coming from our garden. As soon as I lay in bed, I remember I wasn't really tired. I wanted to stay up with my parents. I looked towards the nearest wall, 30 centimeters from the wall, and I saw this clear figure slowly standing and looking at me. I start screaming my lungs out, and in a couple of seconds, an eternity for me, my parents get in, scared by the screaming. As soon as they get in, the figure disappears, and I'm looking just at the wall. I'm really scared, and I start crying, and I tell everything to my parents, who decided to call the nearest priest to bless the house and me, WTF. Anyway, I remember this figure really clearly even though I was really young. That same night, I described the figure as an alien with a black coat, like the Death. And in fact it was this little figure, maybe 1.50 meters tall, dark green, or dark gray, with a black coat on his body and a hood on his head. The eyes were long, oblique, and black. I could see his face thanks to the lights coming from the windows. I remember a small mouth, and that's it. The fact is, why do I have to imagine an alien in this way? I mean, I have never seen movies with aliens in my life, and I have never really been interested, and as I remember, if you ask a kid to draw an alien, he probably would draw a really tall alien without any clothes. This is it. I don't know what to think. Possible alien encounter? So, my mom, 2 brothers, my sister, and I decided to drive to the Grand Canyon. It was beautiful but quite terrifying. Anyways, my mom then suggested we go to Page, Arizona, to see Horseshoe Bend, as she had gone months prior and wanted us to see it. So we arrive, it's cool, whatever. So, that night after we see everything, my mom suggests we go look at the stars. The page is tiny, it's situated in the middle of nowhere. Just desert and mountains for hundreds of miles. We drive to a secluded area where there is almost no light except for, like, the hues, I guess, of the streetlights of a bridge that wasn't too far, and OMG, it was astonishing. I have never seen anything like it before. About 20 minutes of messing around, and my mom suggests we drive to Horseshoe Bend. There's no light there other than the sign, it kind of shines up from the bottom so you can see it, you know? So anyway, we get out and are just standing near the car, chatting, whatever. It was probably 40 minutes when we first arrived, and we heard a cricket that sounded close, but everyone else was silent. We were trying to find it. Anyways, here's where it gets weird. My brother is sitting about 15 feet behind us on that sign he climbed on top of. And the other 4 of us are by my mom's car. My brother sees a shooting star and yells out. About 15 seconds later, I and my mom see another shooting star at the same time. She then says something along the lines of, "I bet people see all sorts of crazy weird stuff out here," and as soon as she says this, the cricket stops making that noise, it's dead silent. We are all staring into the distance, there's a white light level to us. Someone was holding a phone flashlight, and it would turn off, then turn back on a few feet away, and it was moving around in circles slowly. We were literally all hyper-focused on this thing, none of us even said anything. I think we were all thinking, what the actual? I want to say we were staring for 20 seconds when we heard the car door open and slam shut. We all looked at each other, and my brother said, "What the duck, did that door slam shut?" We were all baffled, I don't think any of us said anything. As my mom approached the car, she bent down to peer inside. Suddenly, my brother appeared behind her, shining his flashlight to illuminate the dark interior. The moment he did so, my mom screamed loudly and fled the scene. "He's in there, there's someone." Naturally, we all scream, and we're like, what the F? Where are we running to? My oldest brother looked again, and there was nothing, and we got in and took TF off. We had chills, and all couldn't believe it. My mom was spooked AF and described it as a pale dude in her driver's seat, hands on the wheel. She couldn't make out any facial features really, but to be fair, she was only peering in that window for about 2 seconds tops. We didn't stop talking about it all night. About an hour later, my mom, sister, and I were feeling bold and wanted to go back. Initially, my brother said no, but eventually, he agreed, and we decided not to leave. We left the hotel, got to the car to go back, and as soon as my hand touched that car, I was overcome with a nasty feeling. Came out of nowhere, and I immediately started having a panic attack. I hadn't had one in years. My family was comforting me, and it weirded them out for sure. We didn't end up going back. It was spooky AF, and we all now tell that story all the time. Kinda cool that we experienced something so strange together. This is the first time I've ever attempted to document this, and the first time I've shared it with anyone outside my family. I'm leaving out time and location and some other details because I'm still scared of what might happen with it publicly, I guess. The summer before 8th grade, I and 2 of my friends snuck out at midnight to go walk around the neighborhood and go see these girls on the next block who were having a sleepover. We turn a corner in our neighborhood, and there's this huge black blimp-shaped thing in the sky. It resembles the images of the Hindenburg, but it's much larger and much closer. Completely silent and the size of at least 4 to 5 football fields across, no exaggeration, even though I was young. We stand there, frozen, staring at it and asking each other if we see it. We all do. It's like black polished gunmetal, no lights, no sound, nothing. It's just hovering there. And then I don't know what happened, but time clearly jumps. The next thing I remember is the craft/ship/government experiment/whatever the hell it is gone, and there's a tiny glowing white barbell thing in the sky, seemingly slowly falling to earth with wisps of smoke coming off it. Then, 2 brand new black trucks, resembling F-150s or S-10s but with silver gearboxes on the back, sped down the street, reaching speeds of about 70 miles per hour in a residential neighborhood where the speed limit was set to 25. Then after that, I remember walking home to one of my friends' houses and going to bed. At that point it was like 5 or 6 a.m., and the sun was coming up. We all made a promise to tell my dad in the morning because he worked for the city, but we never did. I don't know what happened later in life to one of my friends who was there, but the other was my best friend, and we sort of made an unspoken pact never to talk about it. I don't know how or why we did that. We all grew up, and I sort of lost touch with him too. We did reconnect on Facebook and such over the years, but it was like there was something between us that neither of us wanted to touch or talk about. Looking back on it now, there's no way we could have been the only ones to see it. It wasn't that late at night, and it was over a heavily populated suburb of a major city. The idea of this has always scared me more than any sort of possible abduction scenario. That there were others, and we're all voluntarily suffering a sort of collective amnesia, except in how we're not. I've thought about hypnosis, but that scares me too, plus I'm not sure if I'd trust the results. I was just a kid then, and I'm not sure if I could trust the hypnotist. What I do know, again, is that there's no way it was just the three of us who saw it. We're talking about a huge thing hovering in the sky directly above hundreds of houses just after midnight on a summer weekend night. But nothing on the news, nothing in the paper, nothing on TV, no word spoken about it ever again by anyone. This is a true story. I'm a little older than the average around here, I think, but I know what creepypasta and stuff like that is. This happened. And there's no way I'm the only one who remembers. No way. Thanks for letting me get that off my chest. Phew. Last night was the last time I felt it. I'm sitting in bed crying, trying to remember its face. I could picture it so well this morning when I first woke up, and now it's clouded, like I can't remember my own memory. My first encounter was when I was young, maybe 4. It's probably the most prominent memory of my childhood. I was lying in bed sleeping and was awoken by a presence in my bedroom. I woke up floating above my bed and heard something in my head telling me to go back to sleep and had a comforting feeling well up from inside me, so I went to sleep. That night was when the fear started. Ever since that first encounter I had, what I thought at the time was irrational, with the gray. The next night my grandmother and I were washing coffee cups that we had just finished eating ice cream out of. It was nearly 10, and suddenly the backyard was filled with light I could only compare to it being midday. I remember looking in disbelief as a huge light was floating above the yard, filling the whole property with golden lights. We all watched it as it floated there for several minutes, then as suddenly as it appeared, it vanished. It didn't fly away or zoom off, it just wasn't there anymore. Skip ahead several years. I was maybe 14 or 15. I was sleeping in my grandparents' fifth wheel camper. It was Christmas or something like that, and all the family was there, and it was easier for me to sleep in the camper so we had more room. At the time they had 2 Great Danes and one of those underground invisible fences, so they couldn't get to the machine shop. Well, it was around midnight, the moon was bright, and I was watching TV. The dogs started raising hell outside, so I looked out the window to see what they were going after. It was small, round, and black like a shadow. It darted around, leaving these dogs in the dust. It darted over the invisible fence and stopped under the streetlight at the machine shop. It went from being about a foot tall to about 7 straight up. It was lanky and looked almost frail. It looked at the dogs and screamed at them with a sound that felt like it was coming from everywhere, like it was in my head and outside. The dogs ran into their doghouse. The creature then turned and looked at me. The exchange only lasted seconds, but it could have been years. The fear that I felt in that short time I can't compare to anything. It then cleared an 80-foot expanse in the woods in a few seconds. I stayed up for the rest of the night in the back room of the camper with 2 knives in my hands, terrified it was going to come back. This morning I woke up in a panic at 4 a.m. with one image seared into my brain, the emotionless face of a gray. Every time I closed my goddamned eyes, I could see them staring at me from the end of my bed. I've started crying again. I'm a 26-year-old man who has been shot at, stabbed, and beaten in bar fights. How can one face instill more fear in me than nearly dying? My biggest fear is that I have a child on the way. A son. What if this happens to him? Not if, but when it happens. I have dealt with this my whole life. I don't know what else to say. Alien/demon encounter that changed my life. This happened about 3 years ago in western Maryland. It was late September, and 3 of my friends and I were on a camping trip at a state park outside of Cumberland. We got there pretty early in the afternoon and set up camp because we wanted to hike around a bit before it got dark. Anyway, after we got back to camp, the sun had gone down, and we gathered some wood for a fire. We were in the process of building the fire when we noticed a light suddenly appear at the top of the hill by our campsite. We were down in a small valley with steep hills all around us, and it was very dark because it was heavily forested. We all kind of ignored it, thinking it was either the moon coming up or maybe there was a building that we hadn't noticed before. As time went on, I became curious about the light, like I needed to go up there to see what it was. My friends didn't share my curiosity and had no desire to go check it out. They just kept telling me it was the moon coming up, and I was being stupid. The light didn't resemble moonlight to me, and it was beginning to frighten me, so I decided to climb the hill to calm my fears. The hill was densely forested and full of briars, and it was totally dark except for the light up ahead, so I had to proceed carefully. I was almost to the light when I heard something moving up ahead. I stopped so I could hear it better, assuming it was a deer or some other woodland creature. However, it didn't sound like a deer. It sounded like someone sneaking through the woods, moving slowly to avoid making too much noise. Then I heard another sound coming from the other side of me. I froze, trying to get an idea of what was approaching me. The footsteps got closer, and I just stood there waiting for whatever it was to find me. Then I saw it. It was the classic gray alien, about 5 feet 5 inches, and the light from ahead was reflecting off its skin. That is the only thing I remember about it. I didn't get a very good look at it before I lost consciousness. The next thing I remember is picking myself off the ground. It didn't seem like any time had passed, but there was a definite lapse of consciousness, like I was taken out and reinserted into time. I decided to go back to the campsite. I could see the light from the fire my friends had made, but on my way back to camp, I started hearing voices in my head. I have no history of schizophrenia and consider myself a very calm and controlled person. I have never had anything like this happen before this or since. The voices are very subtle, but they are definitely there. At first I was kind of ecstatic because I was actually communicating with what I thought were aliens, and this is the most amazing thing to ever happen to me. They tell me I am special, and they chose me to make contact with because I was open-minded. However, they soon start mocking me, and their tone gets very ugly, and they begin to sound almost demonic. They tell me I'm going to burn in hell and to kill myself. They tell me to throw myself into the campfire and get it over with. I am terrified at this point, and I can't get the voices to stop. I get back to the campsite, and my friends are there enjoying themselves like nothing happened. They talk to me, but their voices sound different. They sound like the voices I was hearing in my head, and all I can understand is that they hate me and want me to die. I pretty much have a panic attack and lie down on the ground crying. The voices in my head continue to torment me, and it just keeps getting worse. Finally, my friend starts holding me and telling me everything is fine. We are both atheists, or at least agnostic, but for some reason she tells me to pray to Jesus for help. I start praying out loud and asking Jesus to help me. I do this for quite a while, and the voices finally die down and go away. I go to sleep and try to forget about what just happened, and I see the moon coming up over the hill. Let me start by stating that while I'm not entirely convinced that aliens have made explicit contact with Earth, I do lean towards the idea of interdimensional interaction between what we know and what we don't. Whether they were intentional or not is a matter of debate. And if you're interested in more info, the Skinwalker Ranch stories are great, and eyewitness reports are insightful. So 2 experiences from a while back. Back in the spring of 2012, I went through a few weeks where I just traveled around Central Texas and camped at wherever I was closest to come dinner time. One night I ended up real close to Enchanted Rock, a nifty little mountain halfway between Llano and Fredericksburg. I liked to sleep under the stars while the weather was nice, and it was in the 70s that evening. Perfect for it. I went up the mountain about a quarter of the way up and broke away from the trail to find an okay spot for my tarp and bedroll. After setting up, cooking a light meal, and eating, I laid down for the night. As I was drifting off, I heard a whirring, like a chinook far away. I didn't think much of it until a light cast itself along the trail, a couple 100 feet away. I bolted up, slipped on my boots, and ran to the nearest tree. The light searched around for a while, never really coming close to my camp or me, then just turned off. The whirring, which had been constant through this time, got really high-pitched, and then a circle of 6 yellow lights came to life above the mountain and flew off to the west. I got back to my camp, packed up, and slept in my truck bed with the cover closed. Another time around that same time period, but near the end of my adventurous streak, I was at Lake Whitney at one of the damside parks, Something Bluff. It had been raining all day, and everything was absolutely miserable. Sometime before dark, the rain let up, and I was able to set up my tent. Given the overall misery of the night, I didn't feel like cooking, so I had an MRE in my tent. After I sealed up my tent, and snapped the door closed, I went to bed. During the night, I had an awful bout of sleep paralysis. The inside of my tent got huge, and it was lit up bright white. Around me were 4 bipedal insectoid things. I didn't feel threatened or anything, just a sense of presence. After some time of me telling myself to get up, I woke up. My boots were covered in fresh mud, but my tent was still sealed and my mummy bag was still wrapped up tight, so I ruled out me going to pee sometime. Once I got my bag packed and my sleeping bag rolled up, I stepped outside and took a look around. The ground around me was completely dry. There were no footprints and no mud tracked to my tent from anywhere else around me. Still not sure how my boots got caked in mud the night before, or why my campsite was the only dry one. My mom tells a story about her and her friend. Let's call her friend Lisa. When my mom and Lisa were teenagers, they were up on the roof of Lisa's house, and they saw a bright light in the sky. Suddenly, the light vanishes. The thing is, they think they've been on the roof for like 15 minutes, but something like 3 hours passed. Mom doesn't remember anything about what happened during that time, and Lisa simply refuses to talk about it. For a long time, she would respond to my mom with phrases like "I dunno" and just drop it. So a couple of months later, Mom moves away and loses contact with Lisa for about 10 years. She finally meets up with her again and immediately notices that something is odd about Lisa. Lisa appeared very distant to her, with a very dreamy demeanor. Like, she was really happy and at peace, for no good reason. After they talk for a bit, Lisa brings up the incident on the roof. Mom says she still doesn't really remember anything about it. But Lisa remembers. She remembers everything. She said that at first, it was all in bits and pieces, and she couldn't remember any of it clearly. She was confused and scared and wanted to avoid discussing it. Then, as time passed, she began to remember more of it. She recalls everything vividly, including the 3 subsequent abductions. At first, they paralyzed her somehow and did all sorts of invasive experiments on her, but by the most recent time, they stopped probing her and began to talk with her. They didn't speak English or any other human language, but she could understand everything they said, even though she can't speak their language herself. Apparently, they told her a variety of things, including information about space, Earth, and, most shockingly, a prediction years in advance that she would become pregnant in a specific year, have a stillborn child, and never be able to have children again. They also told her it wasn't their fault and tried to save her, but nothing worked. They also told her that they had abducted my mother. Another time, after that first incident. Mom says she has no recollection of any other potential abductions, but she does have recurring nightmares of being abducted, but she's almost sure that they're just that, nightmares. Anyway, Lisa tells Mom that every time she speaks with them, she comes to understand the truth more and more. When Mom asks what the truth is, Lisa simply responds, "You will know eventually," adding that once she discovered the truth, everything became wonderful. Mom has seen her a few more times over the years. We still live in another state than hers, and she apparently has a pretty normal life and doesn't obsess over alien stuff, like some supposed alien abductees do. She only ever brings it up in passing, not like it's a central part of her daily life. I can't say for sure what happened to me that night, but here is what I know. I was driving home for the weekend from school at Indiana University. It takes me about 2 hours to get home, and I left Bloomington around 10 p.m. At exactly 10:53 I am on a rural stretch of the 2-lane highway I take home, and I notice what appeared to be flashing lights behind me. I thought, great, I'm getting pulled over, so I turned onto the next country road about a quarter mile from where I noticed the lights. As the car came to a stop and I started to open my glove box to get out my registration and proof of insurance, the lights suddenly disappeared, and no car drove past. Now here is where the story takes a turn for the weird, and I am sure you guys will think I'm just making it all up because it really does seem like something straight out of a typical UFO movie or story. The electronics in my car started to go haywire. The radio began to randomly change stations, the volume continued to fluctuate, and the dome light and headlights began to flicker, turning off and then back on. This was at 10:56 p.m. I start thinking to myself that my battery must be failing, or else I have a short somewhere in the electric system of my car. So I lean down to pop the hood so I can look at the battery, and that is the last thing I remember doing. The next thing I know, I open my eyes and see nothing but the night sky full of bright stars. It was a cold night, and it seemed like I had never seen stars that bright in my life. I sat up and looked around, and I saw absolutely nothing. Nothing at all. I was in the middle of a field, surrounded by corn stalks left over from the recent harvest. As I started to come to my senses, I started to freak out. Where am I? Why the duck am I asleep in the middle of a field? Where the duck is my car? I got up and started walking toward the distant headlights I could see from a road about half a mile away. When I got to the nearest intersection, I looked at the signs, which read 350N and 50 watts. I was half a mile away from my car, which was just right off the main road. I started walking toward the headlights I could see on the main road. I can't say how long it took me to walk the half mile, but it couldn't have been more than 10 or 15 minutes. When I arrived at my car, all the lights were out, my battery had died, which struck me as odd because I couldn't have been gone for that long. I looked at my phone, which was sitting on the passenger seat, and the time was 2:17 a.m. Over 3 hours had passed since I turned off onto the side road for the flashing lights behind me. I recall sitting in my car, utterly bewildered and unsure of what had happened to me. After about half an hour of just sitting there, I remembered that my battery was dead, so I got on the phone and called AAA to come out and give me a jump. It took about an hour for them to get out to me since I was a long distance away from the nearest town, during which time I just sat in silence, running through the possible scenarios in my head concerning what had just happened. To this day I couldn't tell you what really happened to me that night. All I know is that I can't think of any plausible explanation as to why I woke up over half a mile from my car in the middle of a cornfield, more than 3 hours after I had stopped. I have only shared this story with one other person, my uncle. I'm certain that others would either view me as insane or dismiss the entire story as nonsense. And I can't blame them. If somebody came to me with a story like that so closely mirrors the stereotypical encounter story, I probably wouldn't believe them either. It's my time to shine. At first I put my story aside as some typical paranormal stuff. Now that I've learned more about aliens, I completely believe I saw aliens. So let's begin. I'm going to have to lay out a detail of the location I was first. I was in Brazil, a tiny town out of São José do Rio Preto. Look it up, it's a beautiful city. Anyways, it was Christmas night, and in Brazil we usually spend Christmas Eve until midnight with our family and then head to bars/clubs. We had decided we didn't want to do that, and there was a park we usually would go to hang out and look at the stars since it was far out from town. So here is the layout. There was a wall and a tree we call ipe where everyone would go to chill and drink. In front was a flat park area with maybe 3 trees and some bushes. To the right of that is a bosque park, lots of ipe trees and a playground, and if you continue heading up the street that is between the 2 parks that lead to a neighborhood. So I'll try to explain this the best I can. Me and 3 other cousins, sat down in our spot against the wall and just started drinking some beers. My male cousin had to piss and went to the lot in front of us with a few trees and peed in front of a bush. He yelled and ran to us that some guy had been hiding behind the bush watching us the entire time. So we basically just think it's a drunk trying to scare some kids. This was in 2014, by the way, we were all 18 to 19. So, us being kids, we started throwing our empty beer bottles at whatever it was that had been watching us. As soon as that happened, the streetlight we were by started flashing and turned off. We were scared as hell. We ran up the road between the 2 parks and sat under another streetlight outside someone's house. It was a block away. As soon as we got under the light, it started flashing as well. We looked back to the park, and now the one thing/person we thought was watching us turned out to be 3. They were still by the bushes about a block away. The shortest in the middle. So what did it look like? They were tall figures, I'd assume 7 feet, and the middle one maybe 6 or 5 feet. They were completely black as if enveloped in a mist. Why we didn't run the hell away, I have no clue. One of them started crying. We were completely overwhelmed with emotions. We then noticed they started getting closer, but they didn't walk. It was like a quick teleportation? I have no clue how to explain. It was also really small distances. Maybe they'd move about 10 feet every 30 seconds or so until the lights under us turned off. What I've found easily is that it's when they get about half a block close to lights is when they trigger it. A light I'd compare to a lantern because it was more like fire popped up in the park with all the ipes. It smelled of something I can't quite describe. It reminded me of funeral flowers but more bitter. During all this, they did get quite close to us. When they got closer, it was like I mentioned above, they had black mists or some sort of smoke around them. Sadly, due to the smoke, all I saw were outlines of their bodies and not anything else. Like I said, they were super tall, they had 2 arms, 2 legs, and a head that was a normal proportion. Just extremely tall compared to the middle one. We ran about 5 blocks until we got to the avenue of town where most people stop their cars and hang out. The smell was just still so strong of bitter flowers. After all that, I and my 3 other cousins became very depressed. I was unable to sleep for over a week. I would have weird dreams, which is probably my mind trying to make sense of it all. I can't explain it still, but we all still talk about it. A close encounter of the third kind with love. A PhD professor of nursing gave the most impressive report to me. With her convention badge, I identified her as a faculty member from a major university. She watched the videos for a few minutes and then allowed me to interview her about her personal contact experience. Some 7 years before, she reportedly had a close encounter of the third kind. After nightfall while camping with her fiancé, her tent was filled with a very bright light. All around the campsite, she could hear footsteps. Apparently, based on prior encounters, she immediately realized that she was having a contact experience. The professor reported not being able to move but was fully awake. She could not stir her friend, who was sound asleep beside her. One humanoid stuck his head into the tent. By her description, the being was the typical so-called gray, with a big head and wraparound eyes. My nursing colleague told me that she was happily excited and frightened at the same time. The being quickly retreated, but she could see his shadow and those of several other similar beings on the walls of her tent that were illuminated by the flickering light of the campfire. She told me that she sent out the thought, "I love you." In a flash, she felt a forceful burst of electric-type energy. The sensation surged through her body from the top of her head down to the tip of her toes. The non-human beings left her campsite, and the encounter was over. The alien is under my bed. To preface, my dad was a staunch believer in UFOs, aliens, and anything paranormal. He figured we, my two younger brothers and I, needed to know about this stuff, so he told us all kinds of stories growing up. It scared the shit out of all of us and still affects us to this day. We're all in our 30s now. When I was in my late teens/early 20s, I lived with my dad. He lived in a trailer that was 3 bedrooms. I smoked cigarettes at the time, and the rule was that I was allowed to smoke in the living room at night but not in my room because the smoke would make it to his room and wake him up. That's important for later. He had built a 3-way bunk bed for us that was still in the house. The middle bunk faced out from the other 2, and there was about 3 to 4 feet of space under it. That was my bunk. It was situated in such a way that if I was lying on my back, the door was directly behind my head with just enough room for it to close. I hope I'm painting the picture right. Anyway, one night I'm watching TV in my room. It's late, so I turn everything off and lie down to sleep. I don't recall how long it was until I heard the noises. I begin to hear what sounds like footsteps go up the hallway behind me, back and forth, back and forth. Then light tapping on the walls along with the footsteps. Then they stop directly behind me in the doorway to my bedroom. Then I hear something run into my room and under my bed. To say I was terrified is an understatement. I wanted my dad awake but was too scared to yell or anything like that. So I grabbed my pack of cigarettes from the TV stand that was close enough to the bed I didn't have to move much. I lit up and started blowing the smoke into the hallway. Luckily, my dad woke up yelling at me for smoking in my room. The next day I explained why I smoked in my room, and he was fine with it but didn't understand why I was scared. That was my dad, though. Ha ha. To this day I can still remember that night like it was yesterday. I saw an alien/being. Once I was lying in bed, trying to sleep, and got in that state where I was kind of asleep and kind of awake. I sleep with the light, white light, of my bathroom on. I'm 25 and afraid of the dark. Yeah, it's ridiculous, and the door half open. In a moment I looked up to my bathroom, and I saw a figure standing at my door in the light so I could see it clearly, the shape of it. I couldn't see the eyes or mouth, but I could see the figure. It was a short, kind of figure with a skinny body, skinny arms and legs, but the head was bigger than it should be, and it was standing right there. I looked at him, and I didn't feel fear or anxiety, which, when I think about that happening now, I could shit my pants haha. I just looked at it calmly, and it stood there. It lasted for like 10 to 15 seconds, and suddenly, the energy from my neighborhood went down, and when that happens, almost never, BTW, it makes a loud sound that I can describe as someone dropping something very heavy. Because of that, I felt that I had woken up and the lights turned off. I couldn't see anything. In like 20 seconds, it came back on, and there was nothing there. Then my heart started racing. I turned all the lights off in fear and went running to tell my parents what happened. My psychologist thinks that I went to his dimension or vibration, or that he came to mine, and that's why we had this contact, but I don't know. One thing that I know for sure is that I wasn't dreaming. What do you guys think? A few years ago, I want to say 2010 or thereabouts, but I'm not exactly sure, I was taking evening classes at a local community college. It being winter and the class starting at 7 o'clock meant it was dark by the time I left the house. Across from our house is a vacant lot and an empty field, with a pair of radio or cell towers in the distance. We're also almost directly on a flight path from the local airport, and we do get the occasional military helicopter flyover courtesy of the nearby Marine base. Point being, I know what all these things look and sound like, even at night. So I was somewhat confused by the sight, one night, of a steady, white light above the cell towers. It wasn't moving or blinking, and it was too bright to be a star. I watched it for maybe a half minute, then shrugged and got in my car. Probably a logical explanation, and I had places to be. So a few minutes later, as I'm driving through the neighborhood, I see the light again. Closer this time. What's more, it seems to be moving in my direction. I'm curious enough as to what it is that I put the car in park and get out for a look. It's hard to judge size, as it is a black object against a black background. Maybe bus-sized if it was right above treetop level, far, far larger if it was any higher. There are these bright, steady white lights laid out in a triangular pattern on each corner of it. As I watch, it drifts. That's the first word that came to mind, and still, I think, the best way to describe it, slow and steady across the road in front of my car. The movement is smooth, unhurried, and at a walking pace. There is no noise. No sound of an engine or disturbing the trees as it flies over. The object is completely silent. That's what really caught me off guard. I mean, my brain could still process what I was seeing, but the sheer fact that something that big could be that quiet was what threw me off. It takes about 30 seconds to drift across the road and disappear behind the trees. That's the last I saw of it. I've seen several. I'm uncertain if they were aliens, but they were definitely unidentified flying objects. First was when I was a kid, and I was already into UFOs. Mom, a family friend, and I were driving home from visiting family, who, incidentally, had a big book on UFOs and aliens that I read a lot. We were on a rural two-lane road with scattered houses and no streetlights. A ways ahead, a motorcycle came around the curve and headed towards us, driving on the center line. We never heard an engine or saw anything but its white headlight. When it got close, it rose up and went over our car. I looked out the back window but I didn't see anything going behind us or any light shining on anything. I was really excited. The second incident occurred over a distant ridge when I was a teenager. On the immediate other side of this ridge is a very large public airport. An enormous fan of red-orange light would dim up, stop, dim out. Very mechanically. Followed by a xenon white strobe, also in a fan shape, fast but irregular. They kept repeating, sometimes overlapping. I got my mom out to see it, too. I went to get on the roof for a better view but saw no more. My mom said that after I went around the house, a glowing orange bar appeared on the horizon. Think of a nearly down-setting sun, but rectangular. Its right end stretched out across the horizon, then the left end followed, like a Star Trek ship going into warp. Last year, I saw a video from Florida of the same exact thing, minus my mom's ending occurrence. I've witnessed multiple instances of satellites performing actions that are beyond their capabilities, such as executing a right-angle turn, or reversing course when I glance back. I've also seen what I thought was a star just blink out. I was out in the evening drawing, I'd drawn the stars on paper, and one was now missing from the sky versus what I drew. Then there was one in middle of nowhere Arizona around 5 or 6 years ago. Parents and I were driving, and out the front, we saw a row of moon-like lights blink from left to right, hold, then blink off in the same order. Their arrangement suggested a tilted sphere or disk. This was years after the Phoenix lights and didn't look like them. What we saw were round, hazy at the edges, orangey white, and didn't move at all. 12 astounding extraterrestrial encounters. While there are still many questions surrounding the origin of UFOs and their occupants, the most popular theory is that they are from the stars, in other words, extraterrestrial. This video presents 12 cases from across the world involving a wide variety of ETs. These reports are supported by a wide variety of evidence, photos, medical effects, landing traces, animal reactions, electromagnetic disturbances, and more. It's time for this subject to be taken seriously by everyone on this planet. 1. The humanoid in the fireball. One evening in the summer of 1961, Mike, age 7, was camping with his buddy in the backyard of his home in Anaheim, California. Suddenly a fiery object swooped down and hovered overhead. Inside, he saw a humanoid figure looking down at him. 2. The alien under the bridge. On a summer day in 1963, a group of children were playing in a park in Lesnica, Poland, when a silver-suited short humanoid appeared next to them. Time seemed to move in slow motion as the figure gestured at them to come closer. The children fled and refused to return to the park again. 3. The little ETS and the tiny UFO. On November 15, 1969, Madame X looked out the window of her apartment in downtown Nancy, France, and saw a tiny UFO glide towards her window, stop, and hover. Inside she saw 2 tiny little ETs smiling and looking right at her. It zoomed away. Afterward, the witness discovered her face had been slightly burned. 4. Visitors to Earth. One summer night in 1972, a lady from Oslo, Norway, saw a large saucer-shaped craft with big picture windows hovering at treetop level. Even more shocking, she saw humanoid figures bustling about inside. Oddly, although other people were around, she seemed to be the only one to see it. 5. A UFO parked by the side of the road. Late at night on September 6, 1973, 2 people drove along the air highway near Penang, South Australia. The passenger was asleep when a telepathic voice woke her up. Looking outside, she saw a UFO parked alongside the road. One humanoid stood next to it, and another was visible through a window. 6. The aliens on the beach. One day in June 1975, a couple walked along Playa de Marin beach in Spain when 3 UFOs appeared, landed on the beach, and out came 3 short humanoids dressed in jumpsuits. The 3 beings converged and then returned to their craft. One of the witnesses tried to communicate telepathically but got a bad headache. 7. The little man in the silver suit. One night in October 1977, José Benedito Santos, age 78, was hunting near Chapada das Mesas, Brazil, when a glowing object landed near him. He approached and saw a short humanoid wearing a silver suit and helmet. It walked right up to him, and José promptly fainted. When he awoke, he found a weird mark on his neck. 8. The ETS on the balcony. When 4 people drove near Danville, California, one evening in the summer of 1979, they were amazed to see a glowing object pace their car. They stopped and watched as the object came lower, revealing itself to be a saucer-shaped craft. On a balcony surrounding the craft, they saw several very tall humanoid figures. Later, they learned many people saw UFOs in that area on that night. 9. Conversation with an extraterrestrial. On the night of August 24, 1985, a couple, both doctors, drove along Route 12 near Ituzaingó, Argentina, when a UFO blocked the road. A beautiful man dressed in a jumpsuit walked up to their window and held a long conversation with them. He told them he was from another planet and that the people of Earth needed to know that we are not alone. 10. The alien from the black sphere. Throughout 1988 to 1989, a farming couple from San Piero a Sive, Italy, experienced repeated visits by a flying humanoid that would arrive in a black sphere. It warned them to keep away but then damaged their crops. After several visits, the husband rushed forward to stop the ET. It quickly struck him with a beam of light. That was the final visit. 11. A night in the tree with aliens. On May 17, 1997, 3 teenage boys became lost in the wilderness of La Rumorosa, Mexico. Taking refuge in a tree for the night, a saucer appeared overhead, followed shortly by several glowing short humanoids. The humanoids soon discovered the boys and actually climbed the tree to observe them. The witnesses' lives were profoundly changed forever. 12. The ETWHO walked on water. One day in 1999, a man was hiking next to a pond in a natural area near Corner Brook, Newfoundland, Canada, when he saw a tall humanoid figure in a white jumpsuit and helmet floating inches above the water. Suddenly it noticed him and glided across the surface of the water, running off into the forest. These 12 cases alone make it undeniable that we are being visited by extraterrestrials, but the truth is that there are thousands more cases. It is no longer possible to deny the truth of the ET presence on our planet. The evidence is clear, we are not alone. Back in the spring of 1997, a group of us neighborhood kids were looking up at the night sky, observing the Halley Comet. I grew up hours from any major city, so the view was pretty clear. After a while, we started to notice a red and a white dot circling around each other, making sudden movements in every direction. Like no aircraft I have ever seen or have ever seen since. At a certain point, they merged into one craft and then shot out 3 smaller crafts. However, their appearance as balls of light made it difficult for us to determine whether they were actually crafts. This went on for a couple of hours. Right before the lights disappeared, they accelerated at lightning-fast speed into the darkness. We all went home terrified of what we saw. The next day, on the front page of our small hometown paper, it said it received several calls. The explanation they gave was that the local airport was testing aircraft. I'm not sure how much I believe that story because of what I saw. To this day, whenever I see my friends that were there that night, we'll sometimes talk about it. None of us can be sure what we saw, but to this day, none of us have ever seen anything like it. First, let me say that I'm a female in my mid-20s. By all means, I'm a normal person with a normal life for people of my demographic. I have never been diagnosed with any mental disorder, never had any mental problems besides occasional bouts of depression that aren't intense, and I'm not on medication. This happened about 3 months ago, and I want people's honest opinions. It was about 7 p.m. one Saturday, and my roommate wanted me to go to the mall and then out to get a drink with her and some other friends. I wanted a nap, so I told her I'd skip the mall and meet her at the bar at 9 p.m. I had not had anything to drink at that point in at least a week and a half, so what happened to me had nothing to do with alcohol. My roommate left for the mall, and I lay down to take my nap. I left the kitchen light on so my room wasn't totally dark. I fell asleep and woke up to the sight of my alarm clock showing it was 8:45. Immediately I thought my roommate was already back because, besides my alarm clock, it was completely dark, which led me to believe she turned the kitchen light out. At this point I was still very groggy, but my eyes were open, and I was lying in the same spot. Here's where it gets weird. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, an ink black shadow came out of my wall, swirled in front of me in mid-air, and went under my bed. This was not sleep paralysis because I moved. When I saw this, I immediately jumped up and ran into the living room. I felt an overwhelming sense of fear and a presence at my front door that didn't allow me to leave. I turned back towards my bedroom, and standing right in front of me was a classic gray alien in a black cloak. Before going into the rest of the story, I will describe this thing's appearance. It was about 5 feet 9 inches in human stature. Its cloak covered up its entire body besides the head. Its face alone was horrifying. A tiny slit for a mouth, no ears, and gray skin. But the eyes were scarier than anything I've ever seen. They were the classic big black eyes, but the appearance alone wasn't what was the worst, it was its expression. It looked at me as if it had a deep disdain and hatred for all human beings and everything we are. I was so deeply afraid and shaken that I couldn't cry. I asked who it was, and it communicated the name Satan in a very condescending way. It didn't speak, it was like telecommunication. At that moment I went into fight or flight and tackled the thing to the ground. The next thing I remember is I woke up on the floor in that very spot, and all the lights were on. The clock said 9:50, so I definitely had some missing time. I have no idea what happened. Nothing like this has ever happened to me before, and I am not a schizophrenic. Has anyone had any experience like this? I just can't believe it was a dream. I've had lucid dreams before, and this seemed absolutely real. Ghost, alien, or natural phenomenon? This event took place in Red River Gorge, Kentucky. For anyone that might be familiar with the area, there is a small parking lot near some bathrooms and picnic tables, close to a sign that says Skybridge on the drive through the canyon. My fiancé and I decided to go to the gorge for the day, do some hiking in the area, and then hike down a steep trail near the aforementioned parking lot to do some stargazing when it started getting dark. It gets dark enough there to see the Milky Way. The parking lot is near some campsites, and the trail starts at the back of one of them. Walking through the campsites, we didn't see anyone. We started heading down the trail to one of my favorite spots in the gorge. The trail is heavily wooded, steep, and near the edge of a cliff at some points, so it isn't often traveled. We made it down safely to our destination. There are some really cool places to camp down there, and I had done so maybe half a dozen times before this. We had just brought a blanket and pillow to look at the stars. We went out on a massive rock that jutted out into the middle of the canyon. There was a massive drop on all sides of this rock, but it was big enough to be comfortable to lie on. So we were just lying on the blanket and pillow we had brought, and it was starting to get dark. The sun had just set, and I was looking straight up. Now I'm still not sure if this is related to the rest of what transpired, but as I was looking up, something caught my eye. Something seemed to be reflecting into my eye, similar to when bright light reflects off a mirror from a distance. After maybe 10 seconds, it stopped happening. I told my fiancé, and we figured it was just a star doing something a bit strange. About a minute after that, we heard a very loud bang behind us, like a gunshot, and it sounded close. This put us a bit on edge, but it was about a week after the 4th of July, so we figured maybe someone had moved into one of the campsites we had walked through and set off a firecracker or something. After a few seconds of looking around, I rested back down on the blanket to look at the stars some more, but right then my fiancé started tapping my shoulder a bit frantically and said, "What is that?" pointing to a location back on the cliff behind us. I sat up, and there was a large, glowing red ball of light near the cliff behind us. This orb of light was very bright and very red. Bright enough that it was a bit difficult to look at directly, though not as intense as something like the sun. My first thought was a flare, but this thing was quite huge. Judging from the trees behind it, it was 6 to 8 feet across. It was also a well-defined, perfect spherical shape. It seemed to be pulsating with energy, growing and shrinking in size a bit as it moved around. One thing that stood out is that it was clearly in front of the trees and the cliff behind it, instead of behind the trees as you'd expect if it were a person holding something. It was casting a red light on everything behind it. It started at about the level of the edge of the cliff and started rising. It rose up in front of the trees until it was near the tops of the trees on the edge of the cliff. It moved very smoothly, gliding around at a slow, constant pace. Then it started to descend. It went downward to around the tops of the trees below the edge of the cliff. It seemed to pause for a few seconds and then start moving in a straight line to the left. After going to the left, it stops again and starts to hover back up the side of the sheer cliff until it is about halfway up the trees on the edge of the cliff. As I said, it seemed to be pulsating, changing sizes slightly but staying around the same average size, but now it seemed to be getting bigger. Except I realized it wasn't actually changing sizes much, it was coming towards us. About that time our amazement turned to horror as we realized we were on the edge of a cliff with nowhere to run and a red ball of who knows what coming at us. However, just then it changed directions again, but this time very quickly. It almost instantly shot back toward the cliff and into the forest. We could see it darting between trees, and in a matter of a second or two, its red glow had disappeared into the woods. I turned to my fiancée and said, "So, time to go?" The unfortunate thing is that the place it had vanished into the forest was pretty close to the trail we needed to take back to the parking lot. So we waited a few minutes to make sure the coast was clear and booked it back up the trail. Fortunately, the trip back up was pretty uneventful. The only strange thing was how quiet it seemed. It was nearly perfectly silent except for our own footsteps and the sound of us brushing through the plants as we climbed the steep trail. We made it back to the car and got the duck out of there. After the event, I tried to make some kind of sense out of it, as I am pretty skeptical of paranormal stuff. The orb of light was present for about a minute before retreating into the trees. The only thing I can really think of that it could have been, besides something paranormal, is ball lightning. I'm not sure if ball lightning only shows up during storms, though, because it was perfectly clear, not a cloud in the sky. Also, it seems strange that ball lightning would be bright red as opposed to white or something. Plus, its slow, precise movements didn't seem like something natural. I went back before dusk a couple of weeks later to the same spot, alone this time. My fiancée refuses to ever go back. I was hoping to see if I could witness something similar and actually be ready to videotape at that time. That is when I took the pics but had no luck seeing whatever that was again, though that's probably a good thing. Black orbs traveling along the edge of my ceiling. I hope this is the right place to post this account. This is something I experienced dozens of times while sharing a house with my roommate back in the late 1990s. There were multiple times at night when I would wake up from a sound sleep because I felt like I was being watched or that there was a presence in the room with me. When I opened my eyes, I would see matte black spheres the size of a volleyball very slowly moving along the edge of where the walls of the room join the ceiling. There were usually 3 to 4 of these at once spaced out evenly around the room. When they reached a corner, they would abruptly turn 90 degrees to continue along the edge of the wall or ceiling. They never moved lower or varied from their path. Think Pac-Man. There was no sound, no smell, no light, or any other description I could provide. The first few times I saw this, I thought they were floaters in my eyes, so I would rub them and nope, still there. A few times I jumped out of bed and flipped on the lights, they were gone. Flipped the lights off again and boom, there they are again, still moving slowly around the room. I have never experienced anything before or since then like this. I have a sneaking suspicion it had something to do with that house, or maybe just that room. The guy that rented that room prior to me was good friends with my roommate Paul, whom I am still best friends with to this day, and Paul told me when I moved in, Chip, the guy who lived here before you, used to complain to me about seeing strange things in this room. Hopefully you don't mind? I'm very open-minded, so of course I welcomed any high strangeness. Strangely enough, I told a friend of mine about this a few years back, and he turned stark white and said to me, "Are you serious, dude?" Because I used to see the exact same thing in my room in Venezuela as a teenager. Maybe it's some sort of minor brain seizure or waking hallucination? To this day I still wonder about it. I have a few experiences. I'll put the most intriguing first. So I was in Rehab up in the mountains of PA. Like really up there, you could look down at this tiny town and see the entire town and all the empty land past it for miles. There were security cameras around the premises. One day one of the older counselors asked me and a few of the other guys if we wanted to see a UFO. He whipped out his phone and showed a video he took with his phone of a computer. On the computer is security footage playing from one of the cameras that is aimed at a small outdoor area with some tables, but you can also see a hilly part of the mountain and the sky beyond it. We are all watching, and this glowing orange disc comes and hovers by the mountain, rocking back and forth. It is there for 20 seconds or so and then shoots off into the sky. I recognized the area the security camera was aimed at, and it was straight from the recordings. Really interesting. The next one, I was probably in 3rd or 4th grade. I and my best friend at the time were on a school field trip at a local amusement park. We were on the top of the ferris wheel when a rainbow disc came roaring through the sky. And it was close, we got a really good look at it. It was like a thick frisbee that had a gray metallic center, with red, yellow, orange, and blue lining on the outside. We got down and ran to our parents, telling them about it, but they didn't see or hear anything. No one else seemed to have seen it. For years I wrote it off as a dream I had, but a couple of months ago I actually reached out to my friend on Facebook and asked him if he remembered it, and he did. Last, I was at a dark point in my life. After rehab, I got an apartment, but due to roommates bailing on the lease, I had to move back home. I was at my lowest. I had lost my father while in rehab, lost my girlfriend, whom I was still very in love with, and experienced many friends dying. One of which I blamed myself for. It seemed that everything I had gone through and everything I had worked towards in the past year and a half had meant nothing, and I was right back where I started. I felt alone in the universe. I went outside one night at 1 a.m. and looked at the stars and asked for a sign. I'm not religious, so I don't know who I was asking, but something answered. I saw a green light in the sky. It looked like a combination of the Northern Lights and a SpaceX rocket launch, but it was a ball. It spread out, and it looked kind of like an angel, only how a child would draw one. It was beautiful and mesmerizing, like a being of pure energy. I felt so at peace and like something greater than my comprehension was looking out for me and telling me not to give up. Visitors to Earth, 10 incredible humanoid encounters. Despite the disbelief of skeptics or the denials from our own governments, the thousands of first-hand cases of close encounters with humanoids speak louder than words. Our planet is being visited by extraterrestrials. These visitors to Earth have been coming here since recorded history. 1. The alien in the beam of light. At 6:35 a.m. on April 3, 1948, driver Giuseppe Lanciano waited for the arrival of a train at San Martino, Italy. Looking up, he saw a disc-shaped object, glowing orange, zoom silently overhead and hover overhead. Giuseppe was joined by another man, and both witnesses watched as a beam of light was emitted from the bottom of the craft, and inside it was a short, robotic-looking humanoid. 2. Wendy and the aliens. Early one morning in June of 1949, Wanda M's father ran breathlessly into their home in Dunino, Poland, shouting that a weird craft had just landed in their yard. He, their neighbors, and Wanda rushed outside. To their amazement, 2 humanoids wearing jumpsuits stood next to a large silver-brown, cone-shaped object. The beings spoke a strange language, gestured to the witnesses, and then returned to their craft. It took off, leaving undeniable traces on the ground. 3. Almost abducted. On the evening of February 5, 1967, Timothy J., age 15, was drawn outside his home in Hilliard, Ohio, when he heard a weird sound, and his dog began barking. Looking up, he was shocked to see a 75-foot-long craft fly low overhead and then land in a nearby field. Several human-looking figures came out and placed small spheres on the ground around the craft. When Timothy accidentally stepped on a twig, the figures turned toward him, came running, and tried to pull him onto the craft. 4. A UFO in the backyard. At 8:15 p.m. on July 20, 1967, Elizabeth Douglas went outside her home in Titusville, Florida, to get something from her car. To her amazement, she observed a 60-foot-wide, bell-shaped craft flying silently overhead and heading in that direction. Looking through one of the portholes, she saw the silhouette of a large-headed, very thin figure looking down at her. She called her daughter outside, and she also saw it. Inside, her son Stephen wondered why his TV screen suddenly filled with static. 5. I know what I saw. One morning in the summer of 1972, Patricia, age 13, sat in the back seat of the family car as they drove south of Molong, Australia. Looking to her right, she saw a saucer-shaped craft sitting alongside the road. To her amazement, 3 7-foot-tall humanoids wearing glowing silver suits stood next to it. 2 appeared to be guarding the craft and collecting samples. One figure was much closer to the road and looked directly at Patricia as their car drove by. 6. The alien and the snowmobiler. On the night of February 26, 1973, Helene R., her brothers, and several friends had enjoyed a day of snowmobiling in the Maquatters area of Quebec, Canada. Suddenly, they all observed a brilliant object zoom overhead. While the others sped away on their snowmobiles, Helene was left alone. Without warning, the strange craft returned and apparently landed. Helene then had a very scary encounter with a short humanoid who tried to physically grab her. 7. The giant humanoid. On the evening of July 1, 1979, 4 teenage boys went hunting for turtledove nests in a rural mountainous area near their homes in Sangonera la Verde, Spain. Suddenly a glowing craft appeared ahead of them, blocking their way. They sat down and watched it maneuver around in the sky for about an hour. Suddenly a 7 or 8 foot tall humanoid dressed in shiny, tight-fitting clothes approached the boys in slow, lumbering steps. The boys hopped on their mopeds and zoomed away in fear. They returned to town and informed a group of people what they had seen. Everyone rushed outside and watched the UFO dart away. Later, strange humanoid footprints would be found. 8. I am certain that I saw an extraterrestrial craft. On the night of January 4, 1994, the Knoll family of Évreux, France, was driving along a rural highway when all three observed a black, triangular object pace their car at very low altitude. Just a few hours later, Didier Maury, a chef from Bequeville, had a frightening confrontation with a brilliant cone-shaped object and an apparent humanoid. Mere hours after that, the Lopez family watched a classic flying saucer with a transparent dome land next to their home. Inside were 3 humanoids, one of whom came out and shone a flashlight-like device on them. These are just 3 of several amazing encounters that occurred on that night and the days afterward. 9. The ET in the Palm Plantation. One night in April 2008, a young man observed a glowing craft descend quickly from the sky and apparently land in the palm tree plantation near his home in Bangkinang, Indonesia. He jumped on his motorbike to investigate and was awestruck to see a 6-foot-tall humanoid with a bald head, pointed ears, a skinny body, and long arms, dressed only in underwear, standing a short distance away. He drove towards it for a closer look, and it quickly vanished. 10. The Magnetic Man. On the evening of May 21, 2008, Walter Lopez and Omar Ferlati were working in a field near San Carlos, Salta, Argentina. Both men suddenly noticed a strange, 2-foot-tall humanoid figure wearing strange clothes standing nearby. They tried to approach but were held back by some kind of magnetic force field. The humanoid ran away, and they reported their encounter to the police, who discovered that another witness had also seen the same humanoid. At the time of the encounter, numerous residents in the area were reporting strange aerial activity. 10 incredible humanoid encounters, each of which adds to the growing database of similar cases, each providing profound insights into the nature of UFO contact, and each offering more evidence that our planet is being visited by a wide variety of extraterrestrial humanoids. Not my story, but my dad's. As a consequence of this not being my story, I can't insist that I know what I saw and all that. All I can tell you is that I believe him, and he has no reason to lie to me. My dad has over a dozen stories like this. He grew up in rural Illinois, near a woodsy area. UFO activity was apparently high back then. I don't know if it was just my family or the whole area, but my dad and my grandpa would sit on the porch and watch lights fly around their house for fun. This was a long time ago, when my dad was a kid. He's in his 60s now. They would watch the stars dart around like laser lights and laugh about it. Shit's mind-boggling to me now. I've only seen that kind of thing happen once or twice, and it freaked me out. Besides that, a bunch of other weird shit would happen to my dad. Some of it is pretty similar to the stuff described in this thread, actually, isolated earthquakes, in Illinois, that nobody else felt, bright orbs floating around in the sky and following him around, etc. It's been a while since he told me these stories, but one of the particularly weird ones has always stuck with me. FYI, I'm completely aware that it sounds like my dad was just ducking with me, and trust me, I'd prefer to believe that. But I have good reasons to trust him. For starters, he's never lied to me about anything else. He wasn't the type of person to make shit up for show. He also had absolutely nothing to gain from making this shit up. He never tried to publish it or even write it down. He would just talk about it sometimes. Anyway. So my dad was in his teens, and weird UFO shit has been happening his whole life at this point. He's out in his driveway for whatever reason, doing whatever people do when they live in a woodsy rural area. His parents aren't home. They're out shopping / at work / whatever. Suddenly, this big, black car pulls into his driveway. The car has tinted windows and is completely black. My dad just kind of watches it pull in, not sure what to think. Something to remember here is not only is this a rural area, but it's 50 years ago. People were a lot more trusting back then. Nowadays, you'd be crazy to leave your front door unlocked, but back then it was no big deal. So this strange black car pulls into my dad's driveway. It's making no noise at all, which my dad noticed right away. The door opens, and out steps a super tall, fair-faced white man. He has blonde hair, an extremely well-tailored black suit, and black sunglasses on. Right away, my dad could see there was something off about him. He looks too perfect. Flawless skin, a childlike smile, and very overdressed for a hot summer day. He looks distinctly out of place. The man walks up to my dad and asks for his name. My dad, around 15 at the time, asks him why he wants to know. The man smiles and explains that he just wants to ask him a few questions, and he means no harm. Bemused, my dad agrees, but he's still wary of this strange man. First, the tall white dude asks my dad if he lives here. My dad says yes and asks why he wants to know. The man has a completely relaxed, non-confrontational tone and seems almost giddy, like he was really excited to be having this conversation. His childish, overzealous grin hadn't faded in the least. He asks my dad if he had seen, felt, or heard anything that he felt was outside of the ordinary. My dad said sometimes and again asked why he wanted to know. The man just kept grinning, and by now my dad was feeling pretty comfortable. He had never seen this guy before in his life. He didn't appear to be any kind of government agent, his behavior was far too unusual. Suddenly, the man's demeanor completely changes. His grin disappears, and he looks worried. Without so much as a goodbye, he opens his car door, gets inside, and drives away, still making no noise at all. A couple of minutes later, my dad's parents come back from shopping. Now for the really weird part. My mom saw the same ducking dude. 30 ducking years later. She was in a bookstore looking to buy something, I don't know the details really, when she turned around and noticed this tall, fair-looking blonde guy in a black suit sitting at a table in the cafe, 30 feet or so from my mom. He was reading a newspaper. Sitting across from him was another dude, dressed exactly the same as the blonde one. They still looked strangely out of place, somehow too perfect, too clean. Now, my mom had heard this story from my dad before, and she actually recognized my dad's description of this man. He definitely stood out. So she's kind of taken aback, trying to figure out if it's actually the man my dad had seen all those years ago. The blonde guy notices my mom looking at him. Again, his demeanor completely changes. He stands up, turns around, and quickly walks out of the bookstore with the second guy right behind him. What the duck, right? I'm actually freaking out a bit thinking about this. I'm 22 now, and I have to wonder if I'm going to run into this awkward blonde stalker. It's like the MIB sent their most inept agent to follow around my dad. Or the most obvious alien ever is trying to study my family in our natural habitat. I don't ducking know. I know this is all very vague. I'm going to bring it up to my dad tonight and try to clarify a few details. I'll be honest, I've pushed this story out of my head because it weirds me out. This happened to me about 2 years ago. I live in northwestern GA and decided to go camping a couple of miles from my house. Everything was normal until I had gone to sleep. At about 3 in the morning, I was awoken to the sound of metal grinding metal and rock grinding rock. I could hear each noise simultaneously and clearly. It sounded like it was right on top of me, and I also felt extremely heavy. I could not move an inch or make a sound. This went on for about half an hour. After it stopped, I waited for another half hour, grabbed my gun, 12 gauge, and my spotlight, and poked my head out of the tent to see just what the hell had happened. Everything seemed normal other than the heavy feeling that someone had turned up the gravity. Everything even looked heavy. I lay back down and went to sleep after that. The next morning when I got out of my tent, I saw a circle about 15 in diameter. It was also about 4 inches deep and 6 inches wide. Nothing was moved out of the way. Everything was pushed down with the dirt, including part of my campfire. It was about a foot from my tent. Needless to say, I packed my things and noped the hell out of there. Bright light and loud humming at night. Hey guys, I just wanted to share an experience with you. This might be a little long. I am not a good writer, so please bear with me. Just to give you an idea, I live in a suburb north of the Greater Toronto area. Across from my house is a green belt, meaning no one is allowed to build anything in that area for nature conservation purposes. It's a highly populated suburb, definitely not a rural area. Last night, my girlfriend was out with her friends, so I decided to binge watch Alyssa Edwards' new Netflix show Dancing Queen by myself. I believe it was around 1 a.m. when I heard this really loud humming noise coming from outside. It sounded like a large aircraft. It definitely sounded like a loud engine, but it was much louder than when trucks passed by the house, and I didn't hear any wheels. Odd, but I didn't think much of it. I just thought maybe a plane flew by? But there aren't any airports near my house. Whatever, I waited for my girl to come home, and we went to bed. This morning when we woke up, my girlfriend looked really exhausted. She said she didn't get much sleep because she was really scared. She said she went downstairs by herself after. I fell asleep to make sure all the doors were locked and backyard lights were turned off. When she got to the kitchen area, which has a door to the backyard, she noticed that the backyard light was still on. She went to turn it off when she saw a really bright white light illuminate the backyard for a second, then it went back to the regular dim backyard lighting. At the moment, she thought there was an intruder peeping around with a flashlight in our backyard, but our Nest Cam didn't pick up any movement or activity, and our dog didn't react. This morning, our dog wasn't waiting by the stairs as he usually does, and we found him hiding in his cage terrified. We immediately thought he must have done something naughty. We searched the whole house to see if he had pooped somewhere, because he had done it before, or maybe chewed up some furniture. We found nothing and tried to comfort him a bit. We were talking about the coincidence, wondering if the three things are connected. Then we got reminded of something that was eerily similar to last night, but we thought was just a dream. This happened about a year ago. I sleep in the master bedroom with a washroom that has its own window facing the green belt I mentioned before. One night, I got up in the middle of the night to take a piss on. My cat followed me to the washroom to drink water. I went back to bed after peeing and tried to fall back asleep while my cat was still chilling in the bathroom. Then I saw this dim light coming out of the bathroom that kept getting brighter and brighter, along with a low humming engine noise that kept getting louder and louder. At first I thought it was just my eyes adjusting to the darkness real quick or something, but it got really bright like those lights at construction sites. The light lit up the whole bathroom, and I remember being so scared I didn't move, but it wasn't like in sleep paralysis where I couldn't move, I was just too scared to move. After I don't know how long of debating if I should be brave to check on my cat in the bathroom, the light and noise just went away. I was still really scared trying to process WTF just happened, and then my cat peacefully walked out soon after. I thought to myself, it must have been a half dream, half awake thing. I told my girlfriend and coworkers the next morning. Everyone agreed it was just a very vivid dream. After that night, I demanded to switch sides with my girlfriend so my side of the bed doesn't need to face the bathroom lol. I never really thought anything of it until what happened last night. This time I was fully awake when I heard the same noise. I honestly don't know what happened. It could just be me being paranoid about the stupidest things, but my girlfriend and I are still pretty shaken up by what happened last night. I apologize for the long story or if my experience didn't live up to some of the other stories here. If any of you who are living in the same area heard weird noises and saw bright lights last night too, please let me know so I know my house isn't haunted or something. Alien sightings and reoccurring dreams. As of now, the dreams have subsided, but most people don't believe me when I tell them this. A few months ago, I constantly had extremely agonizing migraines followed by brain fog. This always happened at night from what I can recall, and there was always an ominous mechanical humming/buzzing over the roof of my house. After the first few nights of this occurring, it had occurred again, but this time I believe I had actually seen what the source of this sound was. What makes this more disturbing is that I live far from any other airports that may be in a 12-kilometer radius of the area I live in. I saw this colossal, triangular aircraft with 3 red but dim lights on its corners. There were green, stroking lights on its sides and white lights around the center of the structure. It moved quickly but slow enough for me to notice it. Sadly, I was too slow to capture a photo of it before it got out of view. After this incident, I kept having extremely detailed dreams about these strange aircraft. One of which in particular was one of the most detailed ones. I was in my house with my mother, and suddenly I felt the urge to go outside and look at the sky. I had my camera with me, and when I had walked outside, I saw this huge triangular craft. I took a few photos of it, and when I went back inside, time had seemingly accelerated from dawn to sunset. I woke up from that dream with a short but excruciatingly painful migraine. The second dream took place in what looked like a UFO assembly line with some sort of gas giant outside a window in space or something. I was sitting in some sort of waiting room, and a man dressed in what looked like some sort of spacesuit took me on a tour. I saw all sorts of UFO types, cross-shaped, dome, cigar, triangular, cube, etc. A few days after this dream, I saw the strangest SHT I had ever seen in my life. I am sorry if my grammar is bad while writing this because I'm currently on mobile. I was standing outside with my friends drinking some Sprite, and an hour after they left, I saw this rectangular, dark metallic object with red lights on its corners hovering by the side of my roof. There was a glass panel on the side of it with something, I can't recall what, inside, controlling it. I dropped my phone in horror before I could take a pic, but it didn't hit the ground. It felt like time stopped. I caught something moving in the corner of my eye. I glanced over to my left and saw this gray, cylindrical thing with contorted legs and a horn with a glowing end on what would be its face. The way it moved will haunt me for a long time. It was jittery but disturbingly smooth as if it was rotoscoped into reality. After that time leapt forward, and it was as if I had been standing in that same position for an entire night. Walked in my house and immediately fell asleep, tried to get my mind off what happened that night but couldn't. I was not under any drugs or intoxication during this. My experience recovering a repressed memory of an alien abduction. This experience happened approximately 2 years ago. I seem to recover a memory of an event that would have taken place about 4 to 5 years before remembering it. I haven't shared this because I didn't know what to make of it for a long time. Things have become a bit clearer, to the point that I now feel confident that this was a repressed memory. I had never followed UFO stories before this. I was skeptical of such things and would have been very afraid of aliens if I had taken such things seriously. The only knowledge of aliens I had then was through pop culture. I'm just going to jump in at what happened that triggered the memory. I had just read an email from my brother where he opened up to me for the first time about some difficult and unusual experiences he'd had throughout his life. We've tried to keep in contact but were raised in different states and households. The email primarily detailed his clairvoyant experiences. He'd kept these things to himself, though he'd apparently been having these experiences all his life. I didn't know what to think about what I'd just read. I did trust him, and I knew that he certainly wasn't hallucinating. It was getting late, so I went to bed. As soon as I laid my head on my pillow, I started to dream. In the dream, I'm riding with my partner on our long commute home from work. We commuted an hour and a half to work and home each day for a few years. I was wearing the clothes I wore during that period, and it was summertime. Up ahead we see some people pulled off the road, standing outside their cars in a small grouping. They're all looking up at the clouds. I look up and see that the clouds look very odd. We pull the car over and get out. I bring my bag for some reason. I'm a woman, so maybe out of habit or not wanting to leave it in the car. It looks like a very strange cloud formation. We're all marveling at it. It looks like a horizontal vortex, like a funnel on its side. It's large at one end, gets skinnier, and comes almost to a point and tapers off. As we're looking at this cloud formation, a large sphere comes through the cloud. The sphere is very large. It's maybe 30 feet around and a perfect sphere. The sphere was transparent but had a peach-colored hue. You could clearly see it, but you could also see through it, if that makes sense. It was about an hour and a half near sunset. The sky itself was getting a bit peach-colored, so I thought maybe the sphere was reflecting that. It was pinkish peach. Just as we're all stunned by this sphere coming out of the cloud, another one comes out. This one looks the same, but it's a little farther away. At this point, my memories reflect a trance-like state that seemed to come over us. If you've ever been in a trance, you can attest that you don't notice that you're in a trance or feel any differently. You can still think, and you experience yourself the same as usual. My first thought was, should I take a picture of this? A voice answered my thoughts as if I'd said them aloud. The voice came as if it was from a woman standing in front of all of us. This seemed very normal at the time, though there hadn't been any such woman standing there. The voice said something to the effect of, "No need. Everyone will be aware in a year's time." I thought, oh, this is it then. They're coming to show themselves to everyone. I don't believe this is true, though. It has been longer than a year since then. The next thing I know, someone is carrying me. I'm unsure of who or how they are carrying me. I only knew I was being carried because I protested. I didn't mind being carried away, as everything seemed so right. I was protesting because they were leaving my bag on the ground where I'd been standing. The things in my bag are important to me, my wallet and everything else I need to keep on me and keep up with. Eventually, they did grab my bag, and I relaxed and seemed to lose awareness completely. The next thing I recall is a brief memory of walking up steep, all white stairs. The group of people that had been by the road is here as well. No one was talking or looking around, just silently walking up the stairs. The stairs were white and quite steep, I thought. The next thing I know is another brief memory. I'm walking upstairs again, seemingly the same steep, white stairs. This time, I'm alone and completely nude. I remember thinking it was very unusual to be naked like I was and feeling so at ease about it. I thought it was almost funny. My next memory is of coming to, lying on a narrow silver table. There are people or beings standing nearby, one by my head, one at my feet, and then a few farther away from the table where I'm lying. They seem to be in the middle of a debate about whether or not to put me back to sleep or into whatever state I'd just been in. I can't say for sure I was asleep since, at times, I seem to be able to walk upstairs at least. One seems to feel they should put me back under, but the other is reluctant because of the long drive I have to make. They seem to reason that if they do it again, it could affect my ability to get home safely. They allow me to stay conscious. Though I'm awake, I'm not fully myself. I'm still more relaxed and agreeable than usual. These people were not at all humans as we know humans to be. They had the basic human shape. Their arms, legs, and heads were all in the same position and in roughly the same proportions as ours. They were tall and slender. The strangest thing about their appearance was their skin. Their skin was nearly translucent. Though I saw one of them across the room putting something on their skin that matched the appearance of the others, so I'm not sure what to make of that. To describe the appearance of their skin, I would say it looked like silicone. It was peach-colored like the sphere had been. They had no hair that I could see. Their eyes were larger than ours. Other than that, I have difficulty remembering the details when I try to recall exactly what they looked like. I can't say what their mouths looked like. I assume they had mouths, though I don't remember seeing their mouths, which is strange considering I carried on a conversation with one of them for at least several minutes in close proximity. I was certainly close enough to see the details of their appearance. I can't say whether they had noses or not, either. Their eyes are a little clearer in my memory, but only slightly. But I remember their bodies and skin clearly. I thought about their bodies and skin, and my thoughts at the time seemed to act as a sort of anchor for my memories. I know that sounds strange, but that's my observation. They all seem to be female to me. I don't know if this is true or if this was another way to make me more comfortable. I have no idea. While lying on the table, the one at my feet was doing something to my body. I have no idea what they were doing with that. It didn't actually touch me, that I recall anyway. They were running their hands just above my legs. I didn't feel anything from it. While that was happening, the one at my head started to ask me some questions. First, she asked me about my partner. She repeated what my partner had told them in a questioning way. From what they said, I could tell that my partner had given them a false name and told them a story to escape this whole thing. That sounded exactly like something my partner would do. She would not submit to something like this voluntarily. I'm far more curious and probably naive, to be honest, than my partner. I essentially told them that. They seemed to know that already, but I think they wanted me to verify it. I think they were a little perplexed at her response. Just like me insisting on my bag, whatever state of mind they were able to put us in didn't seem to have the ability to override any strong will. They referred to themselves as angels. I don't recall at what point I was told this, but I knew that they weren't actually angels but that it was how they referred to themselves when interacting with us. They asked me whether I wanted to help people by saying, "You want to help people, right?" I was a little taken aback because, at this time in my life, I did not want to help people, but I had problems of my own that I was dealing with. But I said yes because, in my heart, I did want to help people. They said, "This will help with that." I was allowed to leave shortly after that, though my memory ends with me confirming that I could go now. They confirmed the clothes I'd been wearing with me. Then, the next thing I know, I'm back in my bed with my eyes wide open and staring off into the corner towards the ceiling of my bedroom. I have had several unusual experiences in the years following when this would have occurred, some before the memory resurfaced and some since. A lot had changed in my life between the time this would have taken place and the time I remembered it. The personal problems I'd been dealing with had reached a dramatic crescendo, resulting in me starting meditation. I had to start meditating because I'd tried everything else, and I simply couldn't go on any longer in my mental state without something changing. I never had any memory at all of this event before this night. I asked my partner about it the following morning, and we've been talking about it ever since. She has no memory of a strange cloud formation or anything unusual ever happening. I never noticed any missing time. Very close encounters with humanoids, 10 shocking cases. Observing an extraterrestrial craft is an undeniably awesome experience. But far more shocking is having a direct, face-to-face encounter with an actual humanoid extraterrestrial. When this close of an experience with an ET, there is little possibility of misperception. It's the kind of experience that radically transforms a person's worldview. This video presents 10 shocking cases of people who have had incredibly close encounters with UFO occupants. These accounts span from 1923 to 2012. They have occurred all over the globe. They involve many different kinds of humanoids. But most importantly, these accounts are supported by compelling evidence, including first-hand eyewitness testimonies, radar returns, photographs, landing traces, and more. One UFO lands for repairs. It was a summer morning in June 1923 when Norman Wilson Massey, age 10, ventured outside his home in Mount Erie, Illinois, to let out the family's horses to go grazing. To his amazement, he was confronted by a landed flying saucer and 5 little blonde men, each only 4 feet tall. They hurried back and forth inside the craft, evidently making reports. About 5 minutes later, the craft rose vertically and zipped away. Norman told only his family. It would be decades before he went public with his incredible encounter. Too many surprises await terrestrials. One summer morning in 1945, Ashebatar Ayav, age 9, left home to go fishing along the shores of Taganrog Bay in the Sea of Azov, Russia. He was about to return home when a silver saucer-shaped vehicle descended from the sky and splashed into the water just offshore. Immediately, a short humanoid wearing a silver suit and helmet exited the craft and approached the witness, saying that he came from another planet. He invited the witness to come on board, but the witness, scared he might not return, declined the invitation. The little humanoid returned to the craft, which sank beneath the surface of the water. 3 humanoids visit a Navy ship. In 1952, the USS Franklin Delano Roosevelt aircraft carrier, which carried nuclear bombs, had the first of what would eventually be up to 10 encounters with ET craft. The first encounter involved a metallic disc, as did a second and third encounter in 1956, some of which were photographed and caught on radar. In 1958, Navy officer Chester Gruzinski was called onto the deck when another UFO appeared, and through the portholes, he and dozens of other officers observed non-human figures staring down at them. This encounter was covered up, as were the previous and future UFO incidents. For the Doctor and the Alien. On August 26, 1966, Dr. Juan José Rivera took his motorbike for a drive near Punta Carnero, Spain, to take some pictures and collect fossils. Suddenly a weird, pervasive silence came over the area. Moments later, a weird monkey-like humanoid wearing dark overalls floated across the road ahead of him. Juan jumped from his motorcycle and chased it off the road to a small, strange gray craft sitting in a clearing. He quickly snapped one quick photograph before fleeing the scene in fear. It would be years before he would talk publicly about his encounter. 5. The humanoids are outside the window. At 10 p.m. on the evening of January 29, 1967, Enid Campbell looked out the window of her home in Knox City, Missouri, and saw a white globe-shaped object the size of a two-story house head straight for her house and float just a few feet above the ground of her backyard. Looking inside it, she was amazed to observe two beings dressed in shiny silvery wetsuits. She shouted for her two children to come, and they saw it too. Afterward, the family discovered burned vegetation in the backyard where the craft had been. 6 UFOs and humanoids land by a train. On the afternoon of April 20, 1967, several railway employees were driving their train past the Casalegno station in Argentina and were puzzled by the appearance of an unusual vehicle with multicolored lights that landed not far from the railroad tracks. Next to the craft was a group of 3-foot-tall humanoids wearing jumpsuits. The train engineer slowed down the train, and everyone watched in shock as these beings moved hastily around the craft. Later they learned that an earlier train had also seen the strange craft. 7. We did not look back. At 3 a.m. on September 30, 1968, Guy Lamargue and his friend were walking along a country lane near Ronsaigny, France. Suddenly a luminous red object zipped across the sky in front of them. Coming around a curve in the road, they saw that the light was actually a craft that had landed in a field by the road. Even more amazing, 2 short humanoids were floating a few feet off the ground around it, shining flashlights on the ground. Then one of the humanoids moved towards the witnesses, coming to within 15 feet. Fearing they had been discovered, the men panicked and fled. 8. Rock-collecting aliens. It was near dusk one evening in 1976 as Hercílio da Costa, age 9, walked to her home in rural San Gonçalo do Amarante, Brazil. She noticed a bright light ahead of her, and as she came closer, she saw that it was actually a silver craft. 7 tall, human-looking figures wearing dark jumpsuits stood around it. One was bending down and putting small stones in a transparent sack. Then one of the beings spoke to Hercílio in an unintelligible language. So frightened that her chest hurt, Hercílio fled in terror. Later, landing traces and footprints were found at the site. 9. The floating humanoid. At 1:30 a.m. on December 30, 1979, Sebastiano Pangieri was awakened in his home in Sicily, Italy, by the sound of his dog barking and his bedroom flooding with illumination. Running to the window, he was amazed to see a short humanoid wearing a skin-tight white jumpsuit, levitating a few feet above the ground in his yard. The figure stayed there for 5 minutes, then quickly glided away and disappeared behind a wall. 10. 2 aliens above 2nd Street. On the evening of May 25, 2012, 6 people in 2 cars were traveling west on Highway 7 in Clinton, Missouri. Looking up, they all observed a large craft with glowing orange portholes hovering in the sky over 2nd Street. Some of the witnesses were amazed to see 2 slender humanoids staring out the window. Soon, one of the witnesses started seeing more UFOs. There are numerous reports of individuals encountering humanoids. These 10 cases may be shocking, but they are actually just a small sample of a huge number of documented cases. These kinds of incidents are far more common than most people believe. And they have volumes to teach us about life beyond planet Earth. The question is, are we ready to learn? As a teenager, I had a strange series of unexplained interactions with 3 different visitors around the age of 15 or so. All 3 were during some stage of sleep. The first experience was late at night, after I had been asleep for a few hours and seemingly woke up for no reason. I woke up in a slight fog and became very lucid to the presence of someone or something nearby. I remained still and pretended to sleep with my eyes still closed as I heard my bedroom door quietly open and I could hear the sound of light footsteps on my carpet as this visitor entered my room. This whole time, I could feel their presence slowly moving from the door at the left side, foot of the bed and make their way around to the right side of the bed where the moonlight was flooding into my room. I feel like I could see the room itself as this was happening but not the visitor. I felt them stop and it was as if they were either watching me or watching the moon outside the window. I was frozen as my instincts told me to basically play dead, as if I were being observed by a predatory animal like a bear or a great white shark who wouldn't attack me if it didn't feel a reason to. I didn't feel like I was so much frightened as I was just frozen and very confused, yet somehow very aware of the passing of time, which felt like I was nearly suspended in time. I remember speaking to this visitor telepathically in my mind, asking it if it could hear me and if so, to give me a sign. Next thing I know, I woke up and forget anything happened until I remember that my door was locked when I went to bed and that it was unlocked when I woke up for school that morning. It didn't occur to me until later that day. I don't know what it was, but I have vivid dreams every night since I was a kid, and 99% of them are not like this was. It feels like a memory of an experience, not a distant dream. I remember every detail today, and I'm 28 now. The next was a dream where I was lucid in the dream because I was suddenly aware of someone else watching me in the dream. I was walking through an empty playground at night when I noticed this very handsome person sitting on top of one of those metal climbing structures that are shaped like a dome. The moon was shining brightly and the moonlight saturated everything blue. This person triggered the most visceral reaction from me, like meeting a soulmate or someone I felt deep love and familiarity with. Yet, they also triggered the uncanny valley for me too. My instincts noticed something was off. They looked too perfect to be human. I said to them telepathically, "I know what you are." To which they smirked at me with unwavering eye contact and said, "I know you do." And I was both suspicious and intrigued. Next thing I know, we were at the end of a long discussion I wasn't present for, and I asked this person something I don't recall. They responded with, "Well, are you really sure you want to know the truth?" And I nodded. They said, "You will know one day, but for now, this is going to hurt." And then I'm laying on my stomach with my back exposed, and they pull out some sort of technology like you would see in a sci-fi movie but more advanced, and it had a long needle coming off of it, and they gave me a spinal tap that burned so much that it woke me from my sleep, and I felt the residual ache on my spine lingering after I woke up for a few minutes. It was the same atmosphere I felt in my room in the last story too, and seemingly the same time at night too, with the moonlight coming into my window. I fell asleep with no memory of it other than subconsciously referring to this person as my cosmic husband or cosmic soulmate. And I still to this day have this deep knowing that I will see them again one day. The last was a frightening and disorienting sleep paralysis encounter during a nap I was taking in the afternoon after school. I had barely fallen asleep when I seemingly woke up. I thought it was odd how fast my nap went by as I just laid down. Everything in my room was normal except I noticed a lamp in the corner of it that wasn't there before. Then my internal alarms began to go off and I felt a wave of dread wash over me, and I noticed a dark figure standing behind the lamp. I panicked and felt like I suddenly was in danger and something sinister was after me. I closed my eyes thinking it was a dream, and I opened them to see this disturbing entity staring me in the face with the most unnatural smile. It looked sort of like Voldemort from Harry Potter with the grin of the Cheshire Cat. I tried to scream and nothing came out, so I closed my eyes and felt my chest get heavier. I eventually woke myself up in a panic and sweating. I had only been asleep for less than 30 minutes and I pretty much felt drained of all my energy, and went into the family room where my mom was and crashed on the couch with no explanation. My mom told me she thought it was strange I was asleep at all because she said she heard me moving around in my room nearby and figured I was awake. I was sleeping the whole time. Never had these experiences again. Not sure why. But as someone who is a medium and occult magician today, I know that whatever these were, they weren't remotely supernatural or paranormal. They were extraterrestrial. Or at least very interdimensional and intentional. I've had lucid dreams with entities today due to my spiritual practices, but nothing like the last encounter, which was horrifying, and the first two encounters were surreal yet still felt very celestial to me. The cosmic being I met I still feel connected to. 2-foot-long praying mantis? This is a story from my mother and younger sister, who I will refer to as S in this post. It happened in Brooklyn, New York, in the late 90s. I was in 2nd or 3rd grade. S was around 4 years old. We had a back porch, overlooking a small fenced yard and lawn. We'd get the occasional regular-sized praying mantis. According to S, one day she was playing in the yard while my mom was hanging laundry up on the back porch. Apparently, this thing just suddenly materialized right there in the middle of the yard. Because S says she turned around and there it was. She just stared at it for a few moments, not sure if it was a toy or what. She said it looked like a 2.5 to 3 foot long praying mantis with big red eyes and tiny black pinpricks for pupils. When the fear finally hit her, S ran up the stairs shouting for Mom. At that moment, all she could articulate was that it was a big bug. My mom barely reacted, of course, because kids get scared by normal bugs all the time. Indeed, the creature relentlessly pursued S as she ascended the stairs. For so long I've imagined what that must have looked like. S convinced my mom to go inside with her. That's when Mom finally saw it. While she and S were watching it from inside through the mesh door, the praying mantis perched itself in one of the chairs on the porch. Not like on the top of the back cushion or on the armrest or something, just in the chair proper. When my mom went looking for a camera, all at once it just disappeared. I asked if it flew away, but neither of them has an answer. It was gone as instantly as it showed up. When my dad brought me home from school around a half hour later, they were still hiding behind the mesh door, looking terrified. I never got this full version of the story till S was older. For years she would become hysterical if she ever saw a praying mantis or even the image of one. I wonder about what this thing could have been or why it only showed itself to Mom and S.
I do know, however, that as I got older, I found that my mother was a very abusive woman, and S, I believe, suffered the most because of it.
Makes me wonder if one of the people I've told this story to is right about it being a demon. Or at least a bad omen. Okay, here it goes. The first time I had ever seen anything was when I was 7 in Houston, Texas. I liked climbing my mom's Suburban in the driveway to watch the stars. One night I saw an intensely bright floating light over the tree line, probably about a half-mile away. I hollered, but nobody came to see it. I did not see anything else until March of 2008. This experience happened between the 10th and the 15th, but I can't give a specific date because I was up for 4 days trying to come up with some explanation to satisfy what I had seen. This was in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. My mother lived in a garden home community, all houses the same size, all one story, and you had great visibility distance-wise. I walked out of my buddy's place at exactly 4 a.m. to a bright starry night. When I walked out, something caught my eye to the left of me. I looked over and saw a bright blue, yellow, green, white, red, and orange strobing flashing light floating silently to the left. I stood in awe at it and did not want to go grab anyone because I didn't want to miss anything. I watched as it passed in front of the moon behind my friend's place, and I saw the outline of the craft. The craft resembled a teardrop or sunflower seed, with light seemingly emanating from its upper half. It was almost as if it was transmitting some type of light pattern upward. It also had a dark, thin, smooth line of exhaust that disappeared 50 to 75 feet behind it. This all occurred no less than 400 yards away from me. After it passed the moon, I ran inside and grabbed someone. He saw it, but it was too far away to make out what it was. I returned home, a few blocks away, and looked out from the driveway in the same direction as the first craft. I saw 2 dim white lights slowly coming over the horizon at a slow pace, heading towards me. I then ran inside and grabbed my mother out of bed. We stood there for about 20 minutes while 5 separate crafts flew over us. First came 2, then 1, about 6 to 7 minutes apart from each other, maybe 20 miles per hour, maybe 200 feet up, completely silent. The way that they looked from underneath was that each one had 2 huge bright white lights, which were maybe 30 to 40 feet across each, but they were so bright that it was hard to get a good estimate. They also had a pulsating red one between the white lights that dimmed and relit. I would estimate, based on the size of the white lights, that each craft was maybe between 150 and 200 feet wide. The final craft that passed over us flew lower and slower than the previous 4. Then, it made a noise. It let out a sound that to this day haunts me. These crafts flew directly over us, and I believe that the sound was an acknowledgement. Whatever was piloting it knew we were watching it, kind of like a hello. I immediately started crying. I had no idea what I was looking at or had just heard. The second big experience I had occurred a couple of weeks later. I was standing in my driveway smoking a cigarette, listening to my iPod somewhere around 2 a.m. I decided to pause my iPod to turn on the backlight and waved my hand over it a couple of times, making somewhat of a strobe pattern. I didn't hear anything, I didn't see anything come up, but I got that being watched feeling. I looked up, and directly above me was a trapezoid-shaped craft with rounded edges that had a dark red and black pulsating glowing outline. It was like flowing electricity. It was not even 75 feet up. I could have hit this thing with a rock. I stood there while it hovered directly above me completely silent for maybe 10 to 15 seconds while it made this kind of motion similar to the ball that Luke trained with in Star Wars. It hovered side to side, front to back in a smooth motion, never getting more than 20 feet away from its original position. It was extremely fascinating, but I was frozen stiff. After those few seconds, I waved one hand at it in a friendly manner. It then changed light patterns and hovered away behind my house. Upon deeper inspection, the fact that it knew that I saw it but made no effort to evade my detection makes me think it wanted me to follow it, although I was too freaked out to think about that at the time. I have seen that same craft on 3 other different occasions, once again in Tuscaloosa, once in Hoover, and once in Bessemer. The time I saw it in Hoover was at an apartment complex at the top of a huge hill with a great overlook. It was nighttime, and I was with friends. Over the overlook, I saw a gray craft facing my direction that looked similar to a Hoth fighter, forgive the Star Wars references, and as soon as I saw it, it took off to the right silently and extremely quickly. The times in Bessemer and Tuscaloosa, the trapezoid shape appeared in the sky solid white, stretched to twice its length, then the bottom shot up to the front, like it hit light speed or something. I do frequently see what I like to call streaks. They look like shooting stars, only very low, moving slower, but they still have tails that stream behind them. They can also appear in many different colors. One strange story is from one night, when I had a dream in Tuscaloosa. In the dream, I couldn't see or hear anything, but I could feel things. I was lying on something cold, and I felt what seemed like rubber between my legs around my junk. It was very strange to me since a lot of people who report abductions report sperm and eggs being taken for breeding programs. The next morning, I went to let the dog out in the backyard, which is very small. To the left of the patio, there was a solid white ring in the grass that was maybe 8 to 10 feet wide. I showed my mother, and she told me that she heard a noise that woke her up the night before, but she just dismissed it. Another extremely confusing experience I had occurred in my driveway in Tuscaloosa. To give you an idea of where this occurred, look up Shelton State Community College. The house was less than a quarter mile from the campus in the Englewood neighborhood. It was nighttime, and I heard this static that I could compare to a jet. I looked over, and directly above the community college was a light blue slit in the sky. I would say it was maybe 200 yards long, completely vertical, and had what looked like white electric currents coming off of both sides of it. I looked at it, and maybe about 25 white things shot out of the slit to the left, one at a time at a quick pace, leaving the trail behind it that I previously talked about. After they passed, the bottom of the slit went upward until it closed, and it made a strange sound, and then it was gone. I've also had a bunch of experiences with orbs. Some solid lights that float across the sky or move in strange patterns, and some that brighten up to a great intensity and then fade as they pass. After that first big experience, I started doing some research because I was so confused. I understand that I've had an abnormally large number of experiences, and I honestly can't tell you why. I wish I could. I found a type of UFO witness called a contactee. These people are similar to abductees, except they are kept up with. I have no idea why I have had so many experiences, and I have only listed a fraction of them. My best guess would be that since I acknowledged the presence of whatever it was I was seeing, it decided to keep up with me. It's kind of a gift and a curse. There are so few people that I can talk with about it and be taken seriously. I want to seek hypnotherapy to see if there might be anything else I could uncover. I'm grateful but still don't know much about my experiences. If you all can get anything out of what I shared, then great. So I decided I would write about my sighting that made me believe in UFOs. It's the only one I could not explain. So I will begin. It happened around the year 2013-14, and I was on vacation with my parents in Bibione, Italy. It's a pretty well-known touristic location with nice beaches. I was swimming in the sea, enjoying the nice sunny day, and one moment I looked up at the sky, and I saw it, a metallic sphere sitting stationary in the sky. I believe it was about or slightly below the cloud level. There weren't many clouds on that day. I was looking at it for like 5 seconds. It was reflecting the sunlight very brightly, like a mirror. Then I looked down for 1 second and looked up, and it was gone, nowhere to be found. I remember looking for it across the sky in all directions to see if I could spot it somewhere, but no, it was gone like it never existed. I was around 14 to 15 years old, and I can remember it so vividly because it had such an impact on me. I never saw anything like that. It was so weird to see it disappear in a second. Since then, I believe that there is something in our skies that we can't explain. Did you see something similar? I live on some property on the edge of Bryan, Texas, and I saw something strange about a week or two ago. I hesitated to post it anywhere or tell anyone besides my girlfriend, who I was on the phone with at the time. It was about 10 p.m. on a weeknight, and I was following my usual nightly routine of walking my dog down the 0.5-mile long gravel road from my house to the highway and back to check the mail. The road curves about a quarter way down, and it's a straight shot to the highway from there. As I rounded the curve, I noticed a large orb that was pulsating color and flickering through all the colors of the rainbow. It seemed to be hovering in the air, like at about the height a helicopter would. It was very similar in appearance to the star Sirius when it's low in the sky, like how it flickers and changes colors, but it was much, much bigger. At first I actually thought I was looking at Sirius and it was somehow appearing huge, like how the moon looks huge when it's on the horizon, but I could actually see Sirius itself over to the left. I couldn't tell exactly how far away it was, but it was about the relative size of like if you held a quarter at arm's length, if that makes sense. It wasn't moving at all, just sitting there in the air, and it made no noise. I had been on the phone with my girlfriend, and I described to her what I was seeing as I watched it for about 30 seconds. I then thought I heard a coyote or some other animal a little behind me, so I turned around to shine my flashlight and make sure there wasn't anything immediately around me. I had only looked away for about 3 seconds, but when I looked back at the orb, it had completely disappeared. I have no idea what this orb could be. I don't think it could have been a helicopter or plane, because I've never seen one flash rainbow colors like that, sit completely still like that, or make zero noise. I live in a dead quiet area, and I always hear helicopters and planes well before I see them. I also don't think it was a drone, because it was way too big to be a drone. I also think I would have seen it fly off if it was any of those. It was the opposite direction from the town center and the nearby Texas A&M campus, so I don't think it could have been anyone shooting anything off from their backyard or something. I don't even know anything that anyone could shoot off or fly that would look like that. I sat on my sighting for a while, not knowing if I should tell anyone or who to even tell, but it's perplexed me for a while now and I'm ready to share. I was abducted by aliens when I was younger. I do not remember what happened prior. All I remember was waking up mid-abduction. Imagine that you wake up from sleeping after a night of drinking. You don't remember where you were before, you just see where you are now. That's exactly how it happened. I woke up standing in my own hallway in my trailer home. I was overwhelmed with the emotion of fear, but I did not know why or what was happening. My body was mostly paralyzed and frozen in place while I was standing. I looked at my feet and then my hands, and I noticed that my hands were on the side of a door in my hallway, with my fingers clutched to the side of the door, as if I was being pulled from behind. I turned my head around slowly, and I saw this guy who was my height, maybe just a few inches taller than me. I was 5 years old at the time. He had a huge head that looked like a praying mantis's head. He had 2 humongous eyes. I couldn't see a mouth or nose or anything like that I remember. He didn't have ears. Just a huge white head and huge eyes. He was wearing a black cloak, not tight-fitting. And he had his hands outstretched like he was trying to grab me. He had 3 fingers on each hand, possibly 4, but definitely not 5. His fingers seemed weird and he moved very little. As soon as I locked eyes with this person, it felt like someone punched me. As soon as my eyes locked with his, I became more paralyzed and I began to forget what was happening. I looked away as fast as I could and then never looked back for about an hour. After I turned my back to him, he was standing in between me and my room. I was standing between him and the kitchen. We were both standing in a very narrow hallway in my trailer home. My fingers were clutched against the railing of a door that we lovingly called the middle room of our home. I could feel myself being pulled back by what felt like a strong magnetic force. Like being pushed back by wind. I could fight it. It wasn't a lost cause. I could struggle. As soon as I stopped looking at him, my memory slowly started to come back. I thought, where am I? And why am I here? I was full of fear and I looked down at my feet. I could tell that I was trying to run away from this guy. Looking into his eyes was so mesmerizing that it made me forget if he was a good guy or a bad guy. It felt indescribable. Later on in my life I would go on to try LSD, and the very peak of that experience is the best analogous experience I can use to describe what it felt like. I forgot if he was a good or bad guy. And then I began hearing thoughts in my head saying, come this way. I considered going to the guy. I didn't know if I was running away from him or if I was running to him. That's how quick and intense I forgot everything in that second. I looked at my legs though and could tell that I was trying to run away. I could feel my body filled with overwhelming fear, and then it slowly occurred to me, if I'm afraid and running away, this must be bad? This must be a bad person. And then I had this overwhelming gut-wrenching feeling that this was not the first time I saw this guy. I had a feeling that I had seen this guy several times before in trips that he made me forget. It was weird. A catch-22 philosophical experiment. I felt like I had agreed to this experiment. It was weird. Like, we had had this discussion before. That he could talk to me and I could go on trips with him, but only if I agreed to have my memory wiped every time. But these were not good experiences. I was so filled with terror that I knew this had to be bad. I thought maybe it was a dream. I tried so hard to wake up. I wanted desperately to wake up. It was at that moment that I realized that I had fallen asleep inside of the middle room and not my bedroom that day. I thought, maybe if I can pull myself back into the middle room, I can find my body lying there and I can jump back into my body and kind of like, wake up. I struggled for more than 30 minutes. My fingers were aching and my legs were hurting. It did not feel like sand and I did not have weakness. I had my full strength and was struggling the entire time there. I was finally able to pull myself maybe 6 inches closer and was able to pull my body into the door frame. To my shock, my body was not lying there. I wanted desperately to wake up. I tried so hard to wake up. I kept pulling myself forward down the hallway and grabbed the side of my kitchen's refrigerator. It is at the end of the hallway going into the kitchen. I grabbed it desperately and kept pulling forward. After a short while I became overwhelmed with fear. I began screaming at the guy behind me. I didn't look at his eyes. But I screamed at him. I begged him. I pleaded and cried and screamed and begged for my life. I was a slobbering mess and begged him please to stop torturing me. My fear and pain slowly turned to anger. I began disparaging the guy. I said, "Why are you doing this to me?" I demanded that he leave me alone. I said things like, "What gives you the right to do this to people?" I asked if he thought I was some kind of animal or that I didn't have emotions and free will. Those are not all the exact words. I spoke in a combination of screamed words and thoughts. But it was mostly thoughts that was experienced. He only spoke back to me in thoughts. As I waited there, he stood emotionless and didn't say anything for a very long time. I didn't know if he was trying to save me or if he was trying to hurt me. I still don't. After maybe an hour more of struggling, I pulled myself into the kitchen and could see the front door wide open in front of me. I don't remember if I saw people outside or not. I can't remember exactly anything beyond this. It was at that moment that I surrendered my body. I gave up. And I hope to not remember any pain. The next thing I know, I woke up in the bed in the middle room. I remember waking up first, and then only after several seconds passed did I open my eyes. I pretended that I didn't remember anything. I walked slowly out of the room and said out loud, "What a weird dream." I went to the windows and looked outside and couldn't find anyone or anything nearby. I stared at the sun coming through the blinds for a long time and could almost feel the guy still in the hallway there. I slowly went back to bed and pretended nothing happened. When I woke up again, I just kept on like nothing happened. My alien abduction story. Anyone else experience anything similar? Disclaimer, there is no way I can prove any of this is factual. I have zero evidence, but maybe, just maybe, someone else has experienced something similar. I also don't know how to explain what I saw, nor some things I heard, but I'll try my best. Here's my story. Back in September 2020, I went to bed normally as I usually did. I fell asleep after 10 minutes or so. I woke up at around 3 a.m., and I was lying in bed looking at the ceiling, but my head was somewhat tilted to the right. I could see my nightstand, my lamp, and my clock in my peripheral vision, and my clock said 3 something. I couldn't see further to the right than that. I woke up with a very bizarre, dreadful feeling, and I felt like I was vibrating from head to toe. I thought to myself, God, I hate sleep paralysis. Here we duck and go. I told myself in my head, wake up, wake up, wake up. But then it dawned on me, I was completely consciously awake, looking at my ceiling in my bed. I was frozen and could not move. My eyes were open, and they were the only things I could move. Then the vibration feeling got more intense, and I felt like I was buzzing. It felt like when one of your limbs falls asleep, but this was a whole body sensation. I started panicking. This was new to me. I've had sleep paralysis before, but this was different. Then I felt myself lift off my bed. The amount of dread I began to feel in that moment is unexplainable. I had a thought enter into my mind that's akin to you are being taken. I was screaming internally, trying to resist whatever was happening. I continued to rise off my bed, and I felt my body rise above to where I couldn't feel my bed at all. My eyes were getting closer to the ceiling, closer. Closer, then all of a sudden it went dark. I passed through the ceiling, but now I was looking down at our rooftop. I was rising in the air slowly but steadily. Once I probably got to about 250 feet above my house, the fear completely left me, and I could see straight down to the rooftops. I thought to myself, from this perspective our neighborhood looks very bizarre, probably because we never really are that high up in the air to see downward from that vantage point. My body began rotating again as I was continually rising, and now I assume I was probably 500 plus feet in the air. As my eyesight came to face the sky above, I saw a silver/grayish disc that had a black opening in the center of it. I got closer to the craft and closer, then I entered it, and everything went black again. When I came to, I was looking down at the earth from space. I was on the craft, but I was looking through a transparent glass material in which I could see earth and space in front of me, underneath me, and above me. It's as if I was free floating in space, but I was aware my feet were on a platform of some kind. As I was looking at the earth through this material, 3 beings came up to me from behind. I knew there were 3 because they introduced themselves to me telepathically but didn't show themselves. I know it sounds stupid, but I cannot explain this part of it. Introduction. There were 2 males and 1 female, and they were all around 7+ feet tall. If I had to take a guess, I would assume they were Nordics, but that's just conjecture on my part since they only relayed their gender and height. Once again, I don't know how to explain this. In my mind, one of the males told me something that I can only translate to come and see or come and look. It might be a variation of we want to show something, but they spoke in my mind with feelings and imagery. If that makes sense? I understood their feelings in my mind were for me to come and look. And in an instant we rapidly accelerated from Earth as if we experienced warp drive in Star Wars, but no, it didn't look blue and swirly. Earth just became so distant so fast that I was blown away. I blacked out, or I should say I don't know what happened between this part and the next. When I came to again, I was looking through this transparent material once again, but this time I was looking at a totally different planet than Earth. Earth looks blue from afar and has vast oceans. This planet looks to be green all around. While looking down at this planet, the being said once again, "Come and see," and we began to approach the planet very quickly. We passed into the atmosphere and flew down seamlessly, no trouble at all and zero resistance, and when we came closer to the surface, we were above a large body of water. I could see the sun glistening off the water, and the water looked very vibrantly blue and healthy, and I thought, Jesus, that water is beautiful. The being said to me in my mind, "This water has not been altered in any way, shape, or form, it is in its most natural and perfect state." I was amazed by how it looked. The craft started moving, and I could see us flying over the water at an incredible speed. Out far in the distance, I could see a landmass appear, and it was getting closer and closer. Once we were close enough, I could see these weird buildings on the edge of the land. The land looked super bizarre. It looked like a deep, foresty jungle, but there wasn't a beach, it just went straight from water to endless, thick green jungle. There were these crystalline-looking buildings near the water that resembled the top half of a top. The architecture looked super strange because usually buildings have squared elements to them, but these looked like they were smooth and seamless as if they were one single material with no screws, frames, etc. After flying over this view, with the buildings and the land, we approached what I think was a hangar of some sort. We landed, and the being said, "We are here, come and see." Then I was in a futuristic-looking city. The design of this city looked like it didn't infringe on nature, as if the building itself was integrated with nature. This is difficult to describe. As we entered this structure, we came into the middle, and it was as if we were in a gathering hub or center. There were hundreds and hundreds of people there. They looked to be regular humans, all Caucasian, with fair complexion. They were all wearing these purplish royalty-looking robes, and it looked so funny but also so intriguing, as if all the people were royalty, but it looked fashionable. I cannot find a picture of what I saw that even resembles this part. All of the people were walking around the city square, and they would pass by each other and exchange pleasantries. For example, "Hey, how are you? Nice to see you," etc. The weird part is they were all talking to each other without opening their mouths. I asked the beings, "How can I hear them?" The beings responded with, "It's their form of what you would call a hive mind, but it's different than what you are thinking." They portrayed to me that they are all connected via a link, think Neuralink, but still had their autonomy. It was like a central communication device they all had in which they could talk, understand each other, and converse essentially through telepathy, which is just advanced technology. They explained to me that it's essentially like calling someone on a cell phone, but the device medium is no longer handheld but in them. They didn't explain anything further. I also saw persons holding glass pads that were just see-through clear glass. I have no idea what they were. I would assume it's like a version of their iPad, but I didn't see any lights or anything else on them. In the central portion of the city, I saw that these people kept approaching these floating glass boxes. These floating glass boxes emitted a light beam from one box to another. They were all separated by maybe 25 feet or so. They would approach the box, open the front portion of it, and stick their hand into the light. The being said, "This is their version of what the internet is to you. They transmit data and information via light." I know that part sounds ridiculous, and I don't know how they download info from light. That's just what the being said. As I continued to observe the people walking around, going to and fro, the being said, "These people have achieved global peace. There are no wars, no illness, everyone understands each other, and they have perfected society. They do not infringe on nature but work with nature. They are more advanced than Earth, but not by much." While the being was telling me this, I got a flash of understanding, or an image in my mind of Earth being behind due to the reasons stated above. It felt like these beings were wanting to show me that there is advanced civilization out there that figures it out and progresses beyond self-destruction. They also showed me that everyone works together to a degree and plays a part in society with the main goal of progression. A good analogy is this: It is as if Earth right now is an old, rusty, broken down Honda Civic with torn up seats, and this planet and this civilization is a brand new, all electric Lamborghini. Terrible analogy, I know. I saw men and women working together in what I assume is just a futuristic looking platform. There was a hand pad thing that used light beams to control something in the city. Once again, I don't have vocab to describe what I was seeing. Everything was so melded together. Everything worked by light, or with light. They worked with light like a potter works with clay. I don't even know how to explain what I saw. I tried my best. The beings took me outside to see the mountainous jungle around the building and a large mountain to the north with a machine rhythmically tapping it. I have no idea what this was for. I got the feeling it was vibrating the earth because when it hit the ground, I could feel a pulse and the earth move. It was sending out vibrations, but I didn't hear anything more about this. The machine looked like a boxing glove machine from an arcade mixed with a giant excavator, but all crystalline in appearance. The beings then told me it's time to go back, and we went back to the disk and left the island, then went back into the atmosphere, then into space. Once again I saw this planet become smaller and smaller as we zoomed away. In a flash I could see we were approaching Earth again, and we descended into Earth's atmosphere, and the beings once again said, "Come and see." We were now above Big Ben in London at nighttime. We must have been about 1,000 to 2,000 feet above it. There was scaffolding around Big Ben like it was under construction. As I was looking at Big Ben through the glass, the beings started talking to each other, and this time I could hear it perfectly. One of the male beings was laughing and said to the other two, "It's always funny to me that we are right here this close and the people down there have no idea we are here." Once they finished their conversation, they said, "It's time for you to return." It felt like teleportation how fast we traveled back to my home. It was almost instant, and I could see my rooftop below. They didn't say goodbye or anything, and I felt myself leave the craft almost the exact same way I entered. The deep vibration feeling, the physical locking, etc. I descended from the craft while looking up at it, and I saw myself exit the bottom, and I felt myself getting closer and closer to my roof. I passed through the roof and saw myself enter my room, and as soon as I hit my bed, I panicked and jumped out of bed like you see in horror movies. The time was then 3:40, and I paced around my room asking myself what in the actual duck just happened. It didn't feel like a dream at all. It was way too vivid and clear, and I was conscious through this experience. The memory plays out more vividly than actual dreams I've had. That's my experience, though. Has anyone experienced anything similar?